Hey everyone, welcome back for some more Standard here on MTG Arena. And what I have for you today has taken me over 2 months to finish working on. No, that's not true. But it is true that it's been over 2 months since my last video. There are a couple of reasons for that. First is I've had a number of things going on in my personal life that have taken priority, and really I didn't have the time to craft decks and come up with ideas, and I didn't have time to record videos and make content and edit videos and all that stuff. I was able to do a few streams here and there, but now things have settled a bit and I am able to put this together for you. Secondly, for a while, I just didn't think that I had very good content to provide. You know, if you caught my streams that I was doing either during the Ninja Turtle set or my more recent streams once the Strixhaven set came out, there were a lot of decks that I was working on that ended up underperforming. You know, I'm talking like a 40% win rate, maybe a 50% win rate with some of those decks. I'm like, I'm not going to showcase this because it would not be fair to you if I say that this deck is good or that this is the way to build this deck, or to even give any insightful feedback about it if the deck is just not working very well. I had a number of brews that I was working on. Some of those I did showcase in the streams, you know, especially with the Ninja Turtle set. I had the Orzhov double spell, and I was also working on an Esper Blink, but really neither of those shells ended up working out very well. I was also working on a different build for Dimir midrange, but I think a lot of you are aware that Dimir midrange is very much underperforming right now in the current standard meta. But now I have returned with a banger, a very unique take on Jeskai Control that I guarantee you will not find anybody else doing. Nobody else has a Jeskai Control build like this. And those of you who were in my streams when Strixhaven came out, you helped me put this deck together. Especially Nino, Matt, Sanity, you guys all gave really good feedback and really good suggestions. So I very much appreciate that. Jeskai Control and also 4-color Control, they've gotten a lot of attention recently with the Strixhaven set. There were a number of cards that came out that have seen some play, and there are just a lot of possibilities for Jeskai Control right now. That being said, Jeskai Control did not have a very good showing at the last Pro Tour in Las Vegas. I'm going to share some of my thoughts about that as well. Let me just start by talking about what you see in front of you, and then I'll get into all of that other stuff later. Kicking things off with the usual Jeskai Control suspects: Get Lost, Normalize, Lightning Helix. I mean, this is no surprise, right? That you're going to find these cards in a Jeskai Control list. But what I want to talk about is the amounts of these different spells that I chose. Before the release of Strixhaven, I think it was pretty much a guarantee that you run 4 copies of Get Lost. But with the release of Strixhaven also came Erode, and I think Erode is a very good removal spell. I don't think it's quite as good in multiples in a control shell as Get Lost, because if you're giving your opponent map tokens but you just keep removing their stuff, then those map tokens don't really provide very much value, whereas giving them lands is a real downside. That is a serious drawback. But just having 1 mana available, you know, to kill a creature or a planeswalker, that really is a bit of an advantage in some cases. You know, sometimes you need 4 mana to do something, and then you want to still have 1 mana left over to cast the Erode, or you got like 5 mana available, but you've cast two mana spells, and now you have 1 mana left over. You can still hold the Erode and all that other stuff. It's a similar feeling to a Null, like how a Null is only 1 mana to counter stuff, and that's a really nice counter spell to have, just because you might have that 1 mana left over. So that's why I have 1 copy of Erode here. This has proven to be a nice quality of life improvement for this deck. There really are some instances where I only have that 1 mana left, and I have the Erode, or I only want to use 1 mana, or like I don't want to like shock myself, you know, and all this stuff. I just have 1 mana left. But I don't think you want to run more than 1 copy in a control shell. 3 Normalize instead of the usual 4. I mean, look, Normalize, Lightning Helix, this is pretty much why you play Jeskai Control. But I've opted to include 1 copy of the Gate. I think the Gate is really strong right now. And it seems like other content creators agree. I don't really know necessarily why. I mean, a lot of Izzet decks are being played, and the Gate hits a lot of things in the Izzet decks. Also in the Landfall deck, there are some very powerful non-creature spells like Earthbender Ascension and Sapling Nursery, Cruel But Rude, Monument to Endurance, more recently Delian Fell. You know, there's a lot of strong non-creature spells in Standard. I really think that Negate is just main deckable at this point. You don't necessarily have to wait until you go up against a control deck to sideboard in your negates. I think this card is just good right now. Still running the full playset of Lightning Helix, and I gotta say, guys, I think Lightning Helix is the most important card in this deck. This is why you play Jeskai Control. And I've seen a number of Jeskai Control lists, even ones that were being played at the last Pro Tour that only had like 3, maybe even only 2 copies of Lightning Helix. I think that's crazy. This is it. Like, this is the spell. This is the Jeskai Control spell, because it's not only the really good, efficient removal, only 2 mana to do 3 damage to something, it also gains you life. Gaining life is so important for control decks because you're going to fall behind. You're going to fall behind in life if you're playing control. You need to use your life total as a resource. And if you have 4 spells in your deck that gain you life, then that just gives you more resource to work with. And of course, it also goes upstairs. And look, that's a win condition for Jeskai Control, is just burn. So again, in my opinion, the most important card in Jeskai Control, and I have no idea why. I don't understand why you would not run the full play set. Obviously, you can cut a few of these out, like if your opponent's playing tons of big creatures, then you may not want the full four after sideboarding. But as it is, main deck, I don't see any reason to not run 4. Then here are other spells that are familiar. 3 Steps Ahead, Day of Judgment, Ultima. I actually think 3 Steps Ahead is not that good anymore. It's just very clunky. It's very slow. Decks are low to the ground right now. They're very fast. Obviously, Prowess, Landfall, these are very fast aggro decks. I've seen lists that don't run any copies of 3 Steps. I don't know about that. Maybe you want to try like 1, because obviously it does counter anything, and then you get the added benefit of, paying 5 mana to draw and discard and all that stuff. But this card is definitely not as strong as it used to be. There are obviously multiple options for the board wipes, Day of Judgment, Ultima, but then there's also like Ill-Timed Explosion, there's Pinnacle Starcades, there's Pyroclasm, Fire Magic, all these things. I've decided to go with the 2 Day of Judgments and then the 1 Ultima. I think Ultima is fantastic. This is still an excellent board wipe, just because it ends the turn. Obviously it gets rid of Earthbended lands, they don't come back. Getting rid of all the artifacts too, especially if you're going up against something like Rakdos Discard that might have the Flail and the Monument, although those decks aren't really playing Monument anymore. But look, there's Izzet Lessons, but also plays Monument, World Wagons, Artifact Tokens, any of that junk. I don't really know why people are choosing to play Ill-Timed Explosion over Day of Judgment. I've seen a number of lists having possibly even no copies of Day of Judgment and instead having Ill-Timed Explosion. That to me just doesn't really make sense. I mean, the advantage of Ill-Timed Explosion is that you do draw some cards, but I just don't think it's worth it. Day of Judgment, just a clean wipe. You don't have to discard a big thing in your hand, and that big thing in your hand might be something important that you want to play later. So now, if the opponent has big creatures and you need to discard one of your high mana spells, you might want that high mana spell. A couple of other interactive cards in this column. This is kind of where my deck separates itself from others that you might see. So I already talked about the Erode, the Negate. I'm main decking a Braid. I think a Braid is very much main deckable right now. It's not only the Monuments and the World Wagons or whatever, there are just a lot of really powerful artifacts right now, including one that is played in many control lists, which I will talk about a little bit later. I'm also main decking a copy of Kutzel's Flanker. This was a suggestion from one of my viewers during the streams, and I think this card is very well positioned right now. There are a lot of decks that are using the graveyard in some capacity, Spell Elementals and Lessons most notably, but look, also any deck that plays Storm Chaser's talent, even the Prowess decks, you can potentially get rid of the thing that they're going to try to pull out of the graveyard. Landfall, you can maybe exile those fetch lands before they can bring them back with an Ice Tool Explorer. Dimir Excruciator, you might be able to exile the Deceit in the graveyard before they can play Kavero and then reanimate it, right, and recast it. I think this card is just good, and if you're not going to exile your opponent's graveyard, play it, gain some life, scry 2, and then now you can also start applying some pressure. So it actually is decent against slower decks and against other control decks, because it's something that technically does demand an answer. It's not... You can't just be taking 3 damage every time. You do need to actually address this thing. Traumatic Critique. This card is awesome. This is one of my favorites from Strixhaven for sure. Obviously, it can be a piece of removal for any creature or whatever, but you can also hit a Planeswalker with it. More importantly, you can also go upstairs. So this, in some cases, is a win conditions. But I also use this just in the early game if I need to smooth out my draws, if I already have like Lightning Helix and a Get Lost, and I might not need to Critique. So I can just even pay X equals 0 if I have 2 mana left and just smooth out my draws. Draw 2 cards, discard 1. I really like this card. I did try more than 1 copy for quite a while. It does still feel good, but I kind of cut one to make room for the flanker, and this has felt a little bit better as a piece of utility. You know, a little bit flexible just to be able to address any of those decks that are using the graveyard, and then also have something down that can apply some pressure or block. I do think you can try like 2 copies in this if you want. I wouldn't necessarily say more than that though. You start to get the 3 copies. It does feel a little bit clunky because you can't necessarily kill an early thing. You know, you have to pay 4 mana to kill something with 2 toughness. Card draws, again, some of the usual suspects, consult the star charts and stock up, but I have also added a copy of Flow State. This card is seeing tons of play in the Is a Prowess decks. The reason why I have it in here instead of the forced stock up, having multiple stock ups in your hand, especially in the early game, is not that good. It's actually pretty clunky. And stock up isn't necessarily that great in the late game either to keep finding gas, because that's really what Consult the Star Charts is for. You know, when you have like 6, 7, 8 lands and now you can look at a bunch of cards in your deck, stock up's more of an early game draw spell to kind of help you find a little bit more gas if you haven't fully taken over the game yet, or to potentially smooth out your draws. That last point about smoothing out your draws, that's why I've added a copy of Flow State. Because here's the thing, let's say you have 2 lands in your opening hand, but by the time you've played them, you haven't found a 3rd one yet. At that point, you're probably going to have to use a Consult the Star Charts to find your 3rd land, right? Well, now that's a waste of a Consult the Star Charts though, because this card gets better later on in the game. That's where the Flow State comes in. If you happen to have this card early on, you can just pay the 2 mana, look at the top 3 in that early turn instead of only the top 2 if you only have 2 lands in your hand, and get that 3rd land. And now you haven't wasted one of your best spells. Now, if you have to get Flow State later on in the game, that's fine too, because you have stock ups, which are sorceries, Day of Judgment, Ultima, these are sorceries. So if you cast one of these, then you're definitely going to have an instant in your graveyard because everything else is instants. So now you're probably going to be able to pay 2 mana and just get 2 cards. That's really good. It makes a big difference. I don't know about running more than 1. I was seeing it a little bit too often then, and if you see it a little bit too often, now you're not really getting the benefit, where the fact that it's rare and you only have a 1 of, it's like if you have it early on in the game, it's like, oh great, that's awesome. But then if you happen to find it later on in the game, it's like, oh great, that's awesome. But if it kind of shows up in the middle, you know, kind of like turn 4, 5, maybe 6, then it's kind of like, this isn't really that good anymore, right? So you're going to see it a little bit more often if you run more than 1, and that's actually not what you want. You know, it's one of those things where, like, by happenstance, if you come across it, then it's probably good. But if you have like multiples, then it's kind of like, oh, well, now I'd rather have a stock up. Then of course, Wan Tong. This card is very well positioned right now with how many people are playing Landfall. Also decent in slower and grindier games where now you get to draw some cards but simultaneously playing a threat. That being said, Wan Tong is really bad against any deck that plays red because they're going to have Burst Lightnings in there, and you can just kill Wan Tong with a Burst Lightning while the trigger's on the stack because Wan Chi is still a 1/1. You at least get to draw the cards, but now you don't get the, you know, the creature doesn't remain. So that's really not that good. I definitely sideboard Wan Tong out when I'm going up against decks that play red. Now we get to the good stuff. Northwind Avatar from Ninja Turtles. 5/5 dragon for 5 mana that, when it enters, if you've cast it, you get to put a card you own from outside the game into your hand. Outside the game means in your sideboard. So by playing this card, you don't have a 60 card deck. You have a 75 card deck because now you get to pull something from the sideboard and you get to use it in the game that you're playing. It could be the first game or whatever, any of the games. You have access to everything in your 75. This was the biggest game changer for me with this deck. I think I was only playing like 1 of these in my previous builds, and I was trying a little bit more of a classic Jeskai build and then trying a few more cards from Strixhaven, and it just didn't really feel that great to me. This Northwind Avatar, this dragon, this is the big game changer. Now this becomes a toolbox deck, just like the Selesnya decks that play the Bright Glass Gearhulk. Nature's Rhythm serves a similar purpose, so does Starfield Shepherd. You know, these cards that let you find something, even the new Emeritus, the Emeritus of Woe, right, is called, what has Demonic Tutor attached to it. Now you get to use that with a control deck, which is very powerful because you just have more answers. One of the tricky things about control is how does it adapt to the meta? Well, with Northwind Avatar, you have 15 more options for adapting to the meta. You know, you don't need it all in your main deck and then just be like, okay, this is a bad matchup, I have to wait until I sideboard until after. Well, the Northwind Avatar might get you the key piece from your sideboard that is super important in the matchup you're playing. Not only that, look, this thing is a 5/5 dragon. I mean, if your opponent can't ignore this, right? I mean, if you play one of these, they're dead in 4 turns if they're at 20 life. So they have to actually address this thing. And for a while, I was actually playing 4 copies of it in the main deck. That felt pretty good. I think you can do that. I chose to go down to 3 because I wanted to make room for a couple of other things. And I was also seeing it pretty often. Like if you're on 4 of any card in your deck, you're going to see it pretty often. And having like multiple Northwinds in my hand, it was a little bit of a liability, you know, sometimes if it just didn't really feel that great or that comfortable. It's like, oh, I have another Northwind, but I'd rather have another piece of interaction or whatever. One interesting thing that you can do with the Northwind is actually make a copy of it with 3 steps ahead. I mean, that's not super common, but you can counter a spell and then make a copy of your Northwind avatar. And if you're doing this on your opponent's turn, now you have 2 5/5 dragons that you can attack with, and you pulled something else, you know, 2 things from your sideboard at that point. Then, of course, Jeskai Revelation. Now, I'm only running 2 copies of Jeskai Revelation in the main, and for a while, I was running none. They were in the sideboard, and I had 4 copies of Northwind Avatar, and I would play the Northwind, and then I would go get the Jeskai Rev from the sideboard, or one of the other pieces, you know, whatever I needed. So I was really relying on the Northwinds to buy me the Jeskai Revs, and that's kind of why I decided to mix this up and instead put 2 in the main, because there were some instances where it's like, okay, I'm going to need to cast this Northwind to go get a Jeskai Rev, but then the Northwind didn't resolve, or the trigger was countered by something while it was still in the stack, and then I didn't get my Jeskai Rev. So having access to Jeskai Rev in the main really does feel pretty important for this deck, even though it really was working pretty well. And honestly, there were games that I was winning with the Northwinds when I had all 4, where I didn't cast a Jeskai Rev at all. I would win the game without Jeskai Rev. None in the main, none in the sideboard. I didn't do that. I just got other stuff and I won the game. So that speaks to how powerful this card is. You can win without Jeskai Revelation. There were also these situations where I had the Northwind Avatar in my hand, but I couldn't really cast it because I didn't want to tap out fully. So I would wait until I had like 7 or 8 mana to actually cast it. And then I'm like, oh wait, if I have 7 or 8 mana, I can just have a Jeskai Rev and I can just cast it instead of doing the Northwind stuff, right? So that's kind of what I was finding. This does feel a little bit better, you know, having the combination of Northwind and Jeskai Rev. Now also, if you only have 2 in the main, it's unlikely that your hand's going to get clogged up with having multiples of these. Having multiple Jeskai Revs in your hand sucks unless you're in the late game already. And another key thing is that by not having so many Jeskai Revs in the main and having a couple of them in the sideboard or other things in the sideboard that you can get with Northwind, they're actually protected then. See, if you're leaning so heavily on Jeskai Rev, then what are you going to do when you get duressed? What are you going to do when you get negated? What are you going to do when you get deceated? You know, all these cards that can disrupt your hand. And there's also ways of just exiling it, exiling all copies of it. And that's potentially really detrimental to your deck. I mean, how are you going to win if you have nothing else? You know, if Jeskai Rev is like the only win condition, what are you going to do then if your opponent takes them all away? So by having the combination of the dragon and the Jeskai Revs and then having access to the sideboard and Jeskai Rev in the sideboard, it does protect your top end a little bit. Another interesting thing with the Jeskai Revelation that you can use it for is actually saving your Northwind avatar. Like if you have Jeskai Revelation up and your opponent's about to remove your Northwind avatar, but they don't necessarily have a super threatening board, then you can bounce the Northwind back to your hand with the Jeskai Rev to save it. And then you can replay it, get something else from your sideboard. So there's actually quite a lot of value that you can kind of coax out with the Northwind by using some of these other spells in your deck. Lands have taken quite a while to figure out, but I think I've got it. Obviously, like, you know, you'll need to adjust how much of each color you have based on the spells that you're using. But this feels like it works extremely well. I really don't have too much of an issue anymore. I mean, look, if you're playing 3 colors, you're going to have to mulligan in some cases. It's just the way it is. So I do mulligan fairly often with this deck, but that's not so bad. You know, playing a control deck, you kind of have to expect that if you're playing multiple colors. And the land that I want to highlight is definitely the Biblioplex. This has seen a ton of play. I think everybody's familiar with this card at this point. This is easily the most important addition for control decks from Strixhaven. This is it. This is the most important card. One key thing though is that this is only for instants and sorceries. I think that's something that people kind of overlook. Doesn't work for artifacts, doesn't work for enchantments, doesn't work for creatures, none of that. So sometimes there are these situations where I have Biblioplexes on the field and I can cast like my multicolored spells, but then I actually can't cast Northwind Avatar because like I might not have the second blue. So that is a little bit awkward. That's also why I don't think you want to try 4 copies. In fact, if you're running any spells that are not instants and sorceries, you know, any number of them that you do rely a lot, that you do lean on quite a lot, I don't think you're going to want 4 copies of this. It also does become a creature, you know, becomes a wizard, and it's a 2/4. 4 toughness is pretty hard to remove, but then it also has a mini prowess, you know, +1/+0 anytime you cast an instant sorcery. So sometimes this is a win condition, you know, on top of having your monks. Maybe this land gets the job done in tandem with your monks. Other utility lands in here that you would expect: Mistrise Village, Core Mountain Monastery, a few Surveil lands. You know, obviously you want to be careful with how many Surveil lands you're playing because they can come in tapped. Same thing with the Core Mountain Monastery and the Mistrise Village, but the Surveil lands actually really can help you with both of these. And obviously the Surveil lands help you turn on the Verge lands as well. You can see I have 8 Verges, 8 shock lands, but then these also do kind of help with the Verges to make sure that they're always online. And look, surveilling is useful in control decks. You know, if you're on, especially if you're on the play and you surveil turn 1, that's great. So when you're working on your own control builds, you want to be careful with how many surveil lands you're running. I don't think you really want to do more than 3, you know, maybe 4, but 3 feels like a nice number. But you can use these to fix your colors. And you can really use the surveil lands to kind of fix where you may be lacking in certain colors. For me, blue is the most common color, so that's why I have the most blue sources, followed by white and then red. Now let's talk about the sideboard, and this is really important because Northwind Avatar, you know, this is part of the decks. I have built this sideboard not just for in between games and for certain matchups and stuff. I've built it differently. You know, this is a toolbox now. This is part of the deck. I have integrated it specifically in with the Northwind Avatar to think, what do I want to be able to go get with this dragon? So that's why this sideboard is different from what you might see with other builds, because I'm using it in tandem with the Northwind Avatar. First toolbox piece is Requisition Raid. Obviously, this is good against Izzet Lesson. It's also pretty good against Rakdos Discard because you might be able to get rid of the enchantment. So that could be like Artist Talent or Cool But Rude, and then a Monument or the Flail, you know, all with one spell and all that stuff. Seam Rip, another very important piece for the toolbox, and this is seriously so valuable. You just have a Seam Rip available to get rid of anything. Obviously, you can also get rid of Cool But Rude or the Artist Talent, but it can get rid of all these small creatures and stuff too. And it's pretty easy to get that with Northwind. You know, look, if you have 6 mana available, Northwind, go get a Seam Rip and do that all in the same turn. I mean, that's just great. Annul, these are not really part of the toolbox. You know, these are for sideboarding in between games, and it's just so good right now. You know, there's a lot of enchantments. All the top decks are playing enchantments or artifacts or some degree or some combination of both, right? High Noon, the most important card against these Izzet decks, and now you always have access to it. And you don't even have to put it in your deck in between games because you got 3 Northwind Avatars here, and before, when I had 4 of them, I was able to get High Noon like whenever, you know. So against all these Izzet decks, you can just go grab a High Noon, play it on the next turn, and now you've basically won the game. You know, I mean, they have to deal with it, they can boomerang it or whatever, but you know, they're not ready to see a High Noon on game 1 unless you're playing the Azorius Tempo deck. 2 copies of Rest in Peace, another great toolbox card. And what I'll usually do between games is I'll put one of these in the main. You know, I have the flanker as well to deal with that, but one in the main and then leave the other in the sideboard, so that then I can still tutor it up with Northwind Avatar. And that brings me to a quick side point that I want to make here. It is a little bit difficult to actually sideboard between games because you have to think, what am I going to leave in here to still have access to in the toolbox during the game with Northwind Avatar? Because like, let's say you take like all these things out, like everything that's relevant in your current matchup, and you put it in the main deck. Well, now when you play Northwind Avatar, what are you going to go get from the sideboard? Like, you're going to go get stuff that doesn't do anything in this match. Like, now you've kind of diminished the value of your Northwind Avatar by taking everything and putting in your main. So you do need to kind of think about this a little bit. It does make sideboarding between games a little bit more difficult. But even so, the upside of just having the toolbox available with the Northwind is absolutely worth it, in my opinion. Other counter spells that you would expect: Disdainful Stroke, Flash Freeze, Pyroclasm. This is a great toolbox card. Gets rid of all the otter tokens, gets rid of small creatures, all that stuff. Pinnacle Starcades, awesome toolbox card. This card is fantastic to have in the toolbox. And it seems like many people are not giving Starcades much attention anymore. It's kind of only played in these artifact decks rather than being played in control cells. But look, I still think this card is really good. It gets rid of all the tokens, all the artifact, all the otter tokens, sapling tokens from the nursery, clues, map tokens, any of that junk, and then on top of getting rid of all the small creatures, obviously it gets rid of earthbended lands, but they do get the land back. And I know you have been waiting for this. Here it is, the Lute. Not in the main deck, here in the sideboard. Resonating Lute is all the rage right now. All of the control decks are playing Resonating Lute. They're playing 3-4 copies in their main deck, and this is how you win, because you get all this extra mana, you get to Traumatic Critique and hit your opponent for 1 million, or there's also Mathemagics, which people are playing, and that's a win condition with Resonating Lute because you have all this extra mana. So why am I not main decking the Lute? It's slow and clunky, and I was just not that impressed. I mean, look, maybe I'm crazy, but I was not impressed with the Lute. I mean, you could just not play the avatars and then just play like 3 Lutes or something like that, but there's so much upside to playing this avatar. You have access to all this stuff: the Requisition Rate, the Seam Rip, the High Noon, the Rest in Peace, the Pyroclasm, the Starcades, all these things, or Resonating Lute. If you're going up against a control deck, then having the Lute in play is such a big upside, but you can go get it. You can go get it with the Northwind Avatar. I mean, look, it's possible your Northwind Avatar gets countered, but if it doesn't, go get the Lute if you're playing a control mirror against another control deck. That's really the only scenarios where I saw big value from the Lute, was against other control decks or against like mid-range decks that are a little bit slower. Like some of the Golgari shells are a little bit slower. That's where Resonating Lute can potentially be powerful. But otherwise, against Prowess, against Landfall, even against Rakdos Discard, against any of these decks that go fast, even against Lessons, this thing doesn't do anything against Lessons. Like, I mean, yeah, you might have access to all this mana, but they're drawing 1 million cards every single turn anyway. Like, it doesn't do anything. And none of that, like, what are you going to do if you have this thing in your hand? You're going to tap out on turn 4? No, you're not going to do that. That would be insane. You're going to consult the star charts. You're going to play Day of Judgment, or you're going to hold up 2 pieces of interaction. It would be insane on turn 4 to tap out for a Resonating Lute. You're probably just going to lose the game after that. I mean, maybe not, and then maybe you win the game, but it's like the Lute only provides a lot of value if you have a Jeskai Rev in hand, if you have a Traumatic Critique, if you have a Mathemagics, and for what it's worth, the Lute doesn't help you cast Northwind Avatar. Now, if you're not playing that many copies of Northwind Avatar, then that might not matter, but that's a real disadvantage especially for my build. So despite the immense potential of the Lute, I just was not impressed. You can only draw a card if you have 7 cards in your hand already. What the heck is that? I've never seen an activated ability. What the heck is that? Seriously. You can only draw a card off it if you already have 7 cards in your hand? What is that? And it also doesn't produce mana itself, so like you can't tap it for mana on the turn that you play it. Granted, you do get, the extra mana from your lands. But one other key thing about the Lute that many people have already pointed out, especially Shanhar in some of his videos, it adds 2 mana of the same color, or 2 mana of any one color. So you can't mix and match. You can't have 1 land left over and cast Lightning Helix. You can't have 1 land left over and cast Normalize. That's a big downside to not be able to cast these super important 2 mana spells. So now what? You're not going to play your Lightning Helixes to be able to play the Lute? Again, Lightning Helix is the most important card in Jeskai Control. This is how you survive. And if you're not able to play as many copies of this because you're trying to play a Lute, well, now the Lute is severely disrupting your deck and your build, right? Again, the Lute is awesome against slower decks and in control mirrors. That's why I have them in here against control decks and slower decks. I'm just going to put them in the main deck. I'll take out the board wipes or whatever. Obviously, I have a 3rd copy of Jeskai Rev in here for the Northwind. Look, it can be here. It doesn't clunk up my deck by having 3 copies in the main deck, and then I'm seeing it a little bit too often, and now I don't have the cheaper pieces of interaction that are more important. But when I'm ready, I can just cast Northwind Avatar, still have mana left over to hold up some piece of interaction, and go get the Jeskai Rev. Here it is, the guaranteed Jeskai Rev in the late game as long as you have a Northwind Avatar. So sincerely, I think people are overhyping the Lute. They're overhyping, they're overvaluing. Again, look, Jeskai Control did not have a very strong showing at the Pro Tour. It wasn't a bad showing, but a lot of those decks, they're running multiple copies of the Lute in the main deck. And I think that's part of the reason why they didn't do that well. So there you have it, my very unique build for Jeskai Control. And again, I gotta give a big thank you and a big shout out to those of you who are watching my streams who helped me with this build and who offered all your suggestions and all your ideas. There are so many different directions you can go with Jeskai Control, and it's a little bit, that's, I think, one of the intimidating aspects about it. I think it's important to just try to find what works for you. Do you not want to try the Northwind avatars? Do you want to play the Lute? If you're going to play the Lute, though, one thing I will say is I don't think you want to run 4 copies of this, maybe 3. I would honestly probably only run 2. You can also obviously put Mathemagics in your main deck or have one in the sideboard as you tutor up with the Northwind Avatar. That's a possibility too, but you're not going to play Mathemagics unless you're playing the Lute. A few spells that I don't have in here at all that may be surprising, one of them being the Unagi of Kyoshi Island. That's a really strong creature, but I just don't think it's as good as Northwind Avatar, even though the Unagi has Flash. The Avatar has Flying, and again, you get access to all these cards when you play it. There's just so much upside, and I don't think you want to play Unagi and Northwind, or even if you have Unagi in the sideboard and you bring it in certain matchups, I just don't think it's worth it. And then also Spell Snare. So when Spell Snare first came out in Lorwyn, I thought it was awesome, one of the most important cards in Standard. But back then, people were playing more 2-mana spells. Now that's not really the case anymore. If you look at Landfall, there's barely any 2-mana spells in there. Obviously, there's Badgermal Cub, but Badgermal Cub in the Landfall deck, that's not the win condition. The win condition is Earthbender Ascension, Mightform Harmonizer, maybe Ice Steel Explorer. That's how those decks actually win. So bringing in Spell Snare for just a Badgermal Cub doesn't really, it's not enough. Landfall doesn't really have 2-mana spells, neither does Prowess. I mean, Prowess has Flow State. That is one thing that you can potentially hit with it, and also Slick Shot Show Off, but they're not running Slick Shot Show Off anymore. They're running the Stallion. Spell Elementals, not really. Dimir Excruciator, not really. I mean, you can counter a Bitter Triumph. So I just don't think that Spell Snare is very well positioned right now. I think if the meta shakes up a little bit and there are more 2-mana spells become more common, then it's worth putting in. I mean, one thing that's really noteworthy is it does counter Consult the Star Charts, even if Consult the Star Charts is kicked. So that is a really important aspect of Spell Snare. Another option that a lot of control decks have been doing is 27 lands. I only have 26 lands in here. I think 27 is just too much. I don't like playing control decks that have 27 lands, no matter what the color combination is. And as you can see, I'm just loaded up on 2-mana spells, right? Loaded up on 2-mana pieces of interaction. I guess they also count Consult the Star Charts, which isn't really a 2-mana spell, right? This is more of a 4-mana spell. But still, just tons of cheap interaction. This is how I like to build my control decks, and I think this is what you want to do because you need the cheap interaction. You need the cheap spells. You don't want to clunk up your hand with a bunch of 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 mana spells. There's also another artifact from Secrets of Strixhaven that I think could potentially be a better option than Resonating Lute, and that is Tablet of Discovery. Some of the decks from the Pro Tour were playing this card, and just the fact that it's only 3 mana and immediately also produces mana once it comes down, I think that those are real advantages. And in that same vein, there are a number of interesting artifacts that could be used in a Jeskai Control shell. So you've got the Tablet of Discovery, you could play the Resonating Lute, but then you've also got some interesting options like Pyromancer's Goggles or Curse Recording to potentially copy a Jeskai Revelation or copy a Mathemagics if you're going to do that, or copy a Traumatic Critique, any of these spells. If you go in that direction with your Jeskai Control build, then you're going to need to make some room, and you might just have to not play creatures, like you don't play Northwind Avatar, or you don't play Wan Chitong or Flanker. But if you don't play these creatures that have ETB effects, then you can actually play Torpor Orb, and Torpor Orb is a very strong card in the right matchup. So that can go in your sideboard, and if you don't play these creatures that have ETB effects, you're kind of using these artifacts instead, then playing Torpor Orb is a real advantage. And if you're not going to play creatures, you could maybe throw in an Unagi in the sideboard just to have a creature, because Unagi doesn't have an ETB effect. That's not an A synergy with Torpor Orb. That's enough talking about the deck. I had a lot of things to say and a lot of things to share, but it's cool, man. I really like this Jeskai build a lot with the Northwind Avatar. It's a lot of fun. Let's move on to the gameplay. I hope you all enjoy. All right, here's my opening hand for the first game of the first match, and this looks pretty good. 2 Surveil lands is a little bit awkward, but starting with a Surveil land, especially when you're on the play, is always good. I have a River Pyre Verge, which I'm going to keep. And now I can pretty much bluff having any spell. My opponent's not going to know if I have Normalize or Lightning Helix or whatever. Nothing from my opponent yet. I can play the other Surveil land now. And there's another land on top, and since I already have 2 lands in hand, this felt like I didn't need to keep this one. But instead find another piece of interaction or anything more useful. And my opponent plays a Furdock Core, so obviously with Furdock Core comes Unholy Annex, at least most likely. I could have negated that, but I figured I can hold the negate for the actual Annex instead of just using it on the Furdock Core, which isn't really doing anything right now. Granted, the Core does become a creature. You can tap 4 mana to make it a creature, or I guess maybe it's only 3 mana. So that is a bit of a concern, right? Because, you know, you gotta actually kill that thing if it's a creature. Ancient Cornucopia comes next, and this is a little bit strange. You know, I don't normally see Furdock Core and Ancient Cornucopia being played together, but the Cornucopia is a little bit more worth a negate since it does gain my opponent life. And I drew a Normalize. The Normalize I would have definitely used on the Furdock Core if I had it. But negate, you know, negate hits a few more targets, so the only problem now is that I can't counter an Annex, but I have to get lost for it. And they play a Delian Fell, so I'm certainly going to counter that. It obviously looks like my opponent is just Golgari mid-range. At this point, I wanted to use the Critique just because they're not... It doesn't seem like they're playing small creatures, and I wanted to just draw some more cards. And that was actually good. I found a land and a Jeskai Rev. I get another Lightning Helix off the top, so this is actually looking pretty good. If I get my 7th land next turn, then I can already Jeskai Rev. There's Unholy Annex, so I can get lost it, obviously. And I have to do it before the end step, or else they get to draw a card. Lightning Helix can, of course, also hit the Soulstone Sanctuary. Now, I drew in a Braid, which it would have been better to get a land, but at least now I can destroy the Furdock Core. And they play an Ugin. So that's a little unfortunate, right? I don't really have an answer for this. Definitely wasn't expecting Ugin. What I am thinking, though, is that if I double Lightning Helix Ugin right now, and if I hit a land, then I can actually kill him with Jeskai Rev. So it's kind of all in, but I decided to go for it, and unfortunately didn't hit the land. So, but now if I hit another Lightning Helix, I can actually kill him, and there it is. Or, well, Get Lost would have done it too. So it ended up working out, but it was a little bit all in. It's just, they really seemed like they weren't playing any small creatures. The only target I have for Lightning Helix right now is the Soulstone Sanctuary. And I wanted to at least try to see if I could get Ugin off the battlefield. So I'm actually thinking of taking this Get Lost instead of the stock up, which also would have been good because they could play anything, right? It could be an Annex, it could be another Planeswalker or whatever. And I wanted to make sure I had an answer, and it's a good thing I did that because they followed up with a Liliana. So this really isn't a Golgari mid-range deck like it initially appeared to be. This really is more of a control deck, it seems like. That's just trying to kind of go big and outvalue the opponent and just kind of use Unholy Annex to drain them of some life. And there's Unholy Annex coming up right now. So unfortunately, I still haven't hit my land. I can play Get Lost, but then I won't have an answer for the Annex. So this is actually getting a little tough, right? I was off to a really good start, but now I've missed my lands and I even stocked up and didn't find a land in that stock up, right? So I just have a bit of a drought with my lands, which also means that I could be getting flooded up soon because my lands might be all clumped up. It's not looking great. You know, they do open up the Ritual Chamber, which I was glad to see. Now at least my Day of Judgment does something. You know, it doesn't just get rid of the zombie. And I do hit the 7th land, but I'm actually thinking that... I was initially thinking that I could Jeskai Rev, obviously, but I'm thinking it's probably better to just Day of Judgment instead of Jeskai Rev at this point because they'll probably animate the Soulstone. I can destroy the Soulstone with the Jeskai Rev and then return, you know, just like another land to their hand. It's not great. You know, they have 5 cards. I only got 1. I mean, granted, my 1 card is really good, but it's as expected. They animate the Soul Stone, so now they drain off the Annex. But I can kill the Soul Stone, but not if they hit off of this map token. And they hit a Requiting Hex, but then they bind it, so I can still potentially destroy it. But then they hit a Tragedy Feaster. So now I'm in a lot of trouble, right? Because they draw that Tragedy Feaster. Now if I can't destroy the Soul Stone, the best I can do is return it to their hand, and then they can replay it. So either way you spin it, they're gonna have demons, is basically what it is. You know, they got Tragedy Feaster, they got the Soul Stone, I can counter the Feaster, but then they still have the Soul Stone, and I take 5. This is just not a good situation for me. I think that, you know, it was a little bit reckless doing the double Lightning Helix on the Ugin. And in retrospect, maybe that wasn't such a good idea, but look, if I had hit that 7th land, then I would actually be potentially ahead in this game at this point. So I decide to do the Jeskai Rev and return the Soul Stone. They'll be able to do it next turn or whatever, but I'm thinking I can at least counter the Tragedy Feaster because they'll probably want to play that. And then I can hopefully find something for the Soul Stone. Unfortunately, I've used 3 of my Lightning Helixes, right? Now, Flow State is good here. I get to get 2 cards off it. I'm going to remove 1 of my monks. And they're going to remove the other monk. I mean, that's not so concerning. You know, obviously, I'm trying to, like, just hold on here and survive. Now, there's my 4th Lightning Helix, which is a very welcome sight. I can counter the Tragedy Feaster, Lightning Helix the Soulstone Sanctuary, and I'm thinking maybe just taking that other 3 steps ahead, honestly, so that now I can keep responding to their stuff. So I was ahead in the beginning, then I fell a little bit behind, but now I'm kind of back in the swing of things. It's actually a pretty interesting game, I gotta say. So they do play the Tragedy Feaster. I'm going to counter it. And I'm debating doing the draw too, because, look, if they drain me off the Annex with the Soul Stone, it's not so bad. I'll just take the 2 damage, and then I'll Lightning Helix it. But it felt like drawing the cards was more important at this point. You know, I think taking 2 life is not... But they didn't actually do it. They didn't play the Soul Stone, which I was a little bit surprised about. I also found a Core Mountain Monastery after that, which is pretty good. I got another Jeskai Rev. So it's actually not looking too bad. They play a Cornucopia, which at this point is irrelevant. And they animate the Soul Stone. I'm going to blow up the Soul Stone with the Lightning Helix. And then I can consult the star charts. But what I'm actually thinking as well, is it better to Jeskai Rev this? If I Jeskai Rev, I can send the Soul Stone back to hand and then do 4 damage to them directly. And then attack with my monks. But and then save the Lightning Helix for when I attack, you know what I mean, and trigger the Prowess. That's why I paused a little bit there. But I just figured, no, let's just do it this way. Now, I actually misclicked. I don't know if you saw that. I accidentally misclicked on this consult. Of course, I wanted to pay the 4 mana to do the full, to get the kicker, but I accidentally misclicked, so now I only get 1 card. It seems like the best option actually is stock up if I'm going to have to only take 1. But at least I can still activate the Core Mountain Monastery, but that was stupid. That was just a misclick on my part. I definitely wanted to, do the kicker there. So now I'm going to stock up, see what's there, and there's decent options. Northwind Avatar, another Consult. I probably don't need a land at this point, but I am also considering taking the land because then I'll be able to I'll be able to play Jeskai Rev and hold up something else, but I have 10 mana anyway to hold up the 3 steps. But it still felt like taking the land is not such a bad idea, because I draw cards off of the Jeskai Rev. I can potentially draw and discard off of the 3 steps, and I can exile from the top of my library with the Core Mountain Monastery. So it didn't feel like I needed a consult at this point. I also have Northwind Avatar. I have ways of getting value, you know what I mean? In retrospect, maybe the consult was just the better choice, but I also just wanted the lands. So they're going to play a Disruptive Stormbrood. I got no more Lightning Helixes, so I pretty much don't have an answer for this thing in that regard. But at this point, I'm thinking that I might be able to just blow it up with Jeskai Rev and then return something else to their hand. I'm not going to return the Annex, of course, because then they can open up the Ritual Chamber again and get another demon. But So I'm going to blow up the Stormbrood and return the Cornucopia. And I didn't realize that I wasn't at their end step there too. So a couple of little mistakes on my part with the kicker on the previous consult. And then I didn't realize that I wasn't at their end step there. And they could replay the Cornucopia. So just a couple of missteps on my part, but hey, at least I've definitely crawled my way back into this. I've got plenty of cards. They don't have any demons in play. I have Get Lost for the NX. At this point, it's totally fine to run out Northwind Avatar. They're tapped out. They can't remove it right away. I can go get whatever. I'm just going to go get the other Jeskai Rev, right? That's in the sideboard. So it is looking pretty good, even though a couple of missteps on my part with the consult and then not being at their end step on the last turn. They play a Furdock Core, which I'm thinking of just countering because, you know, I don't really have a good answer. But then I actually paused here and thought, what if I just remove the Annex at this point? So it felt like that was probably the right thing to do because even though the Annex does drain them of life without a demon in play, it is drawing them cards. And at this point, I'm so ahead in card advantage and I didn't want them to have any chance of catching up to me. So it felt better to just get lost the Annex at this point. So now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to cast the 3 steps and I'm going to copy the Northwind Avatar because now I'm going to do 10 damage in the air. And then obviously I get to go get something else out of the sideboard. And at that point they just scooped. So that was a really interesting game. You know, my opponent's playing a Golgari control deck, which is definitely not a typical thing for Golgari. But that was an interesting game. You know, I was ahead, then I started to fall behind, and then I came back. So sideboarding here is a little bit weird. Annul definitely seems good. They got artifacts, they got the Annex, right? I probably don't need these board wipes as well. So I'm thinking just cutting those. But I am thinking that maybe the Ultima is good because of the artifacts, right? I can blow up their artifacts. But it's a little bit difficult for me to sideboard here because I'm really not too sure exactly what I want because like I was saying in the deck tech, the tricky thing with this is what do you want to leave in your sideboard that you can still get with Northwind Avatar, right? And what do you want to actually have in your deck? I ultimately decided just to cut out the board wipes if I need them at some point. Those I can tutor up with Northwind Avatar if I end up like falling behind and they have a bunch of creatures. But I thought it was better just to play the Resonating Lute. You know, I'm on the draw now, so the Lute is going to accelerate me a little bit. They do, I mean, since they're Golgari, they have ways to blow up artifacts, especially since they have the Stormbrood, right? The Disruptive Stormbrood, which can destroy the Lute when it enters. But still, this feels like the right thing to do. You know, the board wipes are in my sideboard if I need them, but otherwise, just play the Lutes and try to accelerate the mana a little bit. Then I just put in the Requisition Raid because I felt like I didn't need that many kind of soft counter spells. You know, I consider Normalize a bit of a soft counter spell since they can pay mana to get around it. Whereas Annul, 3 steps, Negate, right? Those things, Disdainful Stroke, those are hard counter spells, right? There's no way for the opponent to get around it unless they have their own counter spell. Starting with the Surveil land again. There's another land on top, which is fine. You know, you need to hit lands when you're in a control mirror. They have a Duress, which is a little bit unfortunate. They're probably going to take my stock up here. And they actually didn't. They took one of my Jeskai Revs, which I thought was a big mistake. You know, if I have 2 7-mana spells in my hand, but no stock up to like go find more gas, then what am I really doing, right? So I think it was a big mistake on my opponent's part to not take the stock up there. Now, obviously, turn 3, I can just use that stock up. I got plenty of good options. I got Consult the Star Charts. I got lands. I got Lightning Helix. I'm thinking maybe I don't need the Lightning Helix. You know, I do have one in my hand. But the Lightning Helixes have been quite useful. You know, burns their Planeswalkers and also kills Soulstone Sanctuary. But lands seem more important with a couple of Consults and a Jeskai Rev in my hand. They play a Furdock Core. Not much going on for me. I'm thinking I can probably play this untapped land, but I'm also thinking that I might not have to do that because if I consult on my opponent's turn, I'm going to have to discard a card at my end step. because I'm going to get 2 cards off the Consult, and then I'm going to get a card from my draw stuff. I'm going to have too many cards in my hand, so I don't want to do that, right? I don't want to have to discard the hand size. That would be it's not very... That's one thing with Consult, guys, is that you don't want to necessarily use Consult and stock up in this stuff when you're going to have to discard the hand size. Like, just wait. Just wait until you have less stuff in your hand and then cast the Consults and the stock ups. Northwind Avatar was a good find there, and what I'm actually thinking is casting the Northwind Avatar, getting in for a few hits, but then I'm going to go grab Ultima, because then I can blow up the artifacts. The one thing I forgot about, though, is the Terminus is indestructible. Right, the Terminus is indestructible, so that's what I'm going to do here. I'm going to play Northwind and go get the Ultima, but in retrospect, it's actually not that good of a play because the Terminus is indestructible, so I'm only going to get 2 of the artifacts. And not only that, if I hit a Resonating Lute, then it's going to blow up my loot if I use it, right, while the loot is on the field. So actually, it was not the best idea. It would have been a good idea if the Terminus wasn't indestructible, but it is. My opponent does play an Ugin, which is unfortunate. I don't have an immediate answer to Ugin, but I can probably find one. You know, with my double Consults here, I can probably find a Get Lost or the Erode. And, you know, look, Ugin is not immediately threatening. He doesn't actually make me lose the game. He just gains my opponent life. So now I'm kind of realizing the error of my ways here because I want to use the Ultima, but then I remembered that the Terminus is indestructible. So now I'm thinking maybe that's just not a good idea. You know, I'll just hold it and I'll just use it, but then it won't really do that much. So maybe it's better to just Consult and try to find a Get Lost or an Erode for Ugin. So that's what I thought might be the better usage of my turn here. And I played the lands and Consult so that I could look 1 card deeper instead of using stock up and only look at the top 5. Now I can look at the top 6. No Get Lost or stock up here. Still a few decent options. You know, there's a Resonating Lute. There's a Disdainful Stroke. There's the lands, obviously the Helix. So at this point, it's too late to try to Helix and burn Ugin out. You know, double Helix, Jeskai Rev, that won't do it. So, but taking the loot, you know, when I have an Ultima in hand, that doesn't look so great either. So I'm actually kind of put myself into a jam by mistake by taking the Ultima and now having this Resonating Lute available that I kind of want to take, but then I can't cast Ultima while loot is on the field. So I've kind of messed myself up. I'm still thinking that the loot is the best thing to take because having all that extra mana when you're in a control mirror is just excellent. And then I'm also just thinking taking Disdainful Stroke because it's pretty relevant in this matchup. You know, they got multiple Planeswalkers, right? That I can counter with the Disdainful Stroke. But I'm a little bit dissatisfied. I'm a little bit dissatisfied with my play at this point. It was a little bit sloppy. And obviously a little bit sloppy in the first game too, you know, a little loose with the misclick on the kicker and then the not realizing my opponent was at the end step during that one turn. My opponent's going to animate the cottage and attack. Drawing another Lightning Helix is actually interesting because now if I had taken that first Lightning Helix I saw with the Consult, I would be able to, you know, potentially burn Ugin because I could double Lightning Helix, and then if they plus him, or I'm sorry, triple Lightning Helix, and if they plus him up, he goes to free loyalty, but then I can Jeskai Rev him. You know, as it is, it would have been not the best idea to take that Lightning Helix anyway, even with all that. And at this point, you know, I kind of have to use the Ultima, right, because I'm not going to use it when Resonating Lute is on the field, and then they play an Emeritus of Abundance, which is a bit of an issue because now they can pull something out of the graveyard. They chose to pull out the Duress. So this is actually really tough for me because the Disdainful Stroke does not answer the Emeritus, and it does not answer Duress. So I'm in a tough spot. They're going to take my other Jeskai Rev. At this point, it feels like I should probably start using the Lightning Helix on them directly. They have a Soul Stone, but no Annex, and they're also at 33 life. I got to try to do something here, and I've already lost 2 of my Jeskai Revs. So I'm going to play the Lute and then cast Consult, which should give me potentially some decent options here. You know, I have the mana to do all these things. And there are pretty good options here. There's Northwind, Negate, Erode, and another land. Another land actually does seem good because I still have spells that I want to cast, and the Erode certainly answers Ugin. But I'm going to make a bit of a misplay here, at least what I would consider to be a misplay. I'm going to Erode the Ugin. Now, obviously, that's why I took the Erode. But the thing is, with this Emeritus of Abundance on the field, they're going to be able to cast Regrowth again because they have enough lands. So this Emeritus is going to be able to attack, and then they can just get that Ugin back. Now, I have the answer to Ugin anyway, right? I have the Disdainful Stroke, but they know about it. But really, I don't think that was a good use of that turn because I would have been able to double Lightning Helix and kill the Emeritus, which probably would have been the better line. My opponent's going to Deadly Cover Up. I wanted them to cast the Regrowth and then, you know, get the Ugin back, and then I would counter the Ugin. But they didn't do that. They cast Deadly Cover Up instead. So I'm looking at my graveyard, like, what are they going to take? And I'm like, they're just going to take Jeskai Rev, right? And I thought that actually might not be such a big deal because I have no more Jeskai Revs in my deck anyway, and that is what they did. So that was a bit of a waste of a Deadly Cover Up for them, since I had no creatures on the field and they had the Emeritus, which they could have used to go get Ugin. So it actually worked out kind of in my favor. But then they had another Emeritus anyway, so that's why they decided to do that. You know, they weren't worried about using the Emeritus or destroying the Emeritus with the Deadly Cover-Up. So here, Ugin's going to come down. He's going to destroy one of my loots, but I can at least play the other loots. And I'm going to burn out this Emeritus because if I don't, they're going to keep pulling things out of their graveyard. They have too many lands in play. So now I'm just going to counter the Ugin. He's going to destroy one of my loots, but then I still have a loot, and that's it. Like, I don't have another good play, right? So they're not casting Ugin because they know about the Disdainful Stroke, but they're just using the Cottage to make food tokens. It's really not looking good, right? This is a real issue. I'm really in a bit of a hole right now that I kind of made for myself. You know, I got the Ultima, which wasn't a good idea. But I at least top decked the Northwind Avatar, so now I can go get the Jeskai Rev that was in my sideboard. And they're going to Bitter Triumph my Northwinds. I could have returned the Northwind to my hand and then done 4 damage to them. But then I wouldn't be able to hold up the Disdainful Stroke because I would have to tap all my lands for that. But that is something cool that you can do with the Northwind, is you can return it to your hand with the Jeskai Rev. There's Unholy Annex, unfortunately. But if they animate the Soul Stone at this point, then I can destroy it. They actually didn't do that. They opened up the Ritual Chamber. Now I can return the demon to their hand and then do 4 damage to them directly. My opponent might be thinking, whoa, where'd that Jeskai Rev come from? But my opponent probably knows. You know, I cast the Northwind Avatar. They probably know. That's what I got. Finding a Consult the Star Charts is actually not bad. Now my opponent gets drained for 2. And I have a 3 steps ahead, which is also not bad. You know, counter spells at this point are actually pretty useful. So it doesn't really matter how I tap my lands here, but I figured I might as well at least have some ownership over what I'm doing, right? Instead of just trusting the owner tapper, but it doesn't really matter. Casting Kicked Consult the Star Charts. And there's a few decent options here. There's a Lightning Helix, there's a Get Lost, there's a Traumatic Critique. The Traumatic Critique is actually really attractive because I might be able to kill them. Even though my opponent's at 27 life, I might be able to kill them because of the Resonating Lutes. So I have a bunch of lands. You know, I have this mountain in my hand as well. I have a bunch of mana. So I'm really considering taking that Traumatic Critique because I'll be able to do like 20 damage or something like that to them. And then I took the Get Lost because, you know, obviously Unholy Annex, but Get Lost pretty much answers everything. You know, if I want to destroy the Annex, I can do that. If I want to destroy the Soul Stone, I can do that. If I want to destroy Ugin, I can do that, right? All that stuff. I'm probably not going to be able to use the Get Lost on the Restless Cottage because if I do that, then they will animate the Soul Stone for sure after that. And then, you know, get the drain and gain off of the Annex. But if I don't destroy the Cottage, then they get a food token. So they play another Unholy Annex. And the first thing I was thinking is that I should counter this, but then I was also thinking I might not want to counter this because if I destroy that Soul Stone and they don't have a demon in play, that's 4 life that my opponent's going to lose. But then they can also activate the Ritual Chamber if this Annex lands. So if this Annex lands, they activate the Ritual Chamber, and then they have a Soul Stone and the demon from the Ritual Chamber on the field. I can't get rid of them both. So instead, I'm going to counter this, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a copy of one of my monks. This is going to maximize my damage on the next turn with the Traumatic Critique. So now I'm going to get 3 monks, and then I'm going to get prowess on all of them when I play the critique. So I'm really trying to end the game on the next turn, obviously. Draw and discard, just get a couple lands, doesn't matter. But now I can get Lost to Soulstone. See, because look, they're going to activate this cottage, and they're going to be able to attack, and I'm not going to stop it because I want to get rid of the Soulstone instead. It's 2 life either way, but the thing is that the Soulstone is going to be held back as a blocker. So I want to destroy the Soulstone since the Soulstone is going to block my monks, and I want to get in for as much damage as possible. So right now they're at 25 life with the food token, but if I destroy the Soulstone, then they're going to be at 21 and then 23 because they're going to lose 2 life off of the Annex. With the critique, I'm going to be able to do like 20 damage to their face or something, and then with the prowess from the monks, it should definitely be enough. So I should be able to win the game on the next turn. Destroy the Soulstone. They lose 2 life, but they're still at 23 off the food token, obviously. And then I'm going to Traumatic Critique them. So now I'm just going to count how many lands I have. It's actually good that I found another land off the top. I had another land in my hand, too. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So they all tap for 2. So I have 22 mana right now, which means the critique can do 20 damage to them. I can do X equals 20. Because it will be 2 for the red and the blue, and then just do X equals 20. So I have the game, because the only thing that they can do, unless the only thing that I'm thinking about here is what if they have a Requiting Hex, because they have 1 card unknown in their hand. But even then, it doesn't matter, because I'll do 24 damage in total with the Monk Prowess, and 24 damage with the 2, including the 2 remaining monks. I mean, it's actually 26 damage with all the monks in play, but. So either way, I have the game, right? Because even if they have a hex, if they crack the food and do a hex, then it doesn't matter. So X equals 20. This is absurd. This is absolutely absurd. X equals 20 with the Traumatic Critique. They crack the food, and now I'm just wondering if they have Requiting Hex. They don't. Because there's no stick or anything, but even if they did, I would have done 24 damage exactly. So that was crazy, right? What a crazy end to that that matchup against the Golgari Control. All right, here's my opening hand for the first game of the second match. This looks pretty good. Can start with a Surveil land. I am on the draw, but still starting with a Surveil land and then having access to all 3 colors is good. And there's another land on top, which is also good. My opponent showcases Boros colors and then plays Generous Plunderer. I'm not familiar with this card. I had an idea of what it does. I know it has something to do with treasure tokens, but at the beginning of my opponent's upkeep, they create a treasure token, and then I also get a tapped treasure token. Then when it attacks, it deals damage to me equal to the number of artifacts that I have. So I'm actually thinking that this guy is not too bad. I mean, I could have Lightning Helix this guy, but it doesn't, like, why would I do that? My opponent's giving me a treasure token. And if I'm playing a control deck, me having extra mana is a good thing. So I didn't think it was worth killing this guy with Lightning Helix. I think it's better just to hold no more lives and see if they do something else. But as it is, you know, this, I don't mind getting a treasure token. I'm going to take a damage here. And my opponent's not going to play anything. So with them not playing anything, now I felt like, okay, let me get rid of this guy, because I was worried that there was some kind of combo that they were trying to do. I wasn't sure what it was. I really haven't seen this guy played in a lot of decks. But I was worried that there was some kind of combo between having lots of treasures that I wasn't aware of. So it felt like that guy was a bit of a setup creature, and I didn't want to have them do that. And now with the treasure token, I can also consult the star charts. I can already consult the star charts because I have 4 mana. So why not, right? Kill that guy, consult stars, and my opponent missed a land drop. So I guess in a way it was good that I removed him because my opponent doesn't have access to extra mana now. I can consult. I'm certainly going to try to find a land. And look at this. They play Return the Favor, another card that I'm not too familiar with, but they basically get to copy my consult, and then they get to change the target of it, and they get to target themselves. So they got their own consult to star charts. Nifty little play from my opponent. Now there's an archive and a mountain and then a lightning helix. I didn't think I might need the other lightning helix. I had the traumatic critique to try to remove another creature. I have the normalize to try to counter something. I got stock of consult star types if I try and find my gas. So I didn't think that the lightning helix was really that necessary. It felt better maybe to just get a couple lands here. I'm not sure if I'm going to play the tap land or the untapped land just yet. I want to see what I draw, and I drew a 6th land. So actually looking pretty good. If I want to play the shock land and play the Northwind, I can, or if I want to play the tap land, I can. So I'm actually in a pretty nice position right now. And look at this, my opponent plays a multiversal passage and plays it on black. So as soon as I saw this, I was like, they're playing a Greed's Gambit deck. They're playing a Mardu Greed's Gambit deck, and there was something with the Return the Favor or something with the Generous Plunderer that they were going to do. So I am a little bit concerned. I'm a little bit sketched out because I'm not too sure how to handle this. You know, I might be able to counter a Greed's Gambit if they try to play it, or I might be able to kill the Iroh, the T-Master, with the Traumatic Critique if they play him after having the Greed's Gambit, and then when they try to give me the Greed's Gambit. My interaction isn't that great. I would have liked to have had maybe like one more counter spell or something, but as it is, I don't really know what to do. Now look at this, they play an island. So this is actually a 4-color deck. Now I'm really confused. I don't know what's going on anymore. I've never seen a 4-color Greed's Gambit deck that plays blue. And I'm thinking it could still be that because there's the bird. I forget what it's called, but there's that bird. It's from Murders of Karlov Manor. It's the disguise bird that when you flip it over, you get to give your opponent a permanent. So I'm thinking it could still be Greed's Gambit, and they got that. And my opponent plays a Valley Floodcaller. I don't know what's going on. Now I'm thinking, is this an Otter combo deck? But it's not Teamer. Typically with the Otter combo, it's going to be Teamer colors. So I don't know what's going on. I'm so confused, and I'm like, all right, well, I guess I can kill this thing with Traumatic Critique, but this was actually a mistake. I'm going to pause the video here. Do you see why this is a mistake? Why is it a bad idea for me to try to Traumatic Critique this Valley Floodcaller? I mean, I obviously tapped it for only X equals 2, so then I could still hold up mana for Normalize if they try to counter it. But why is this a bad idea? So you'll see why in a second here. They do have a spell to be able to respond to my Traumatic Critique. It's another Return the Favor. And the reason why this was bad is because now the Valley Floodcaller is going to get ++1. So the Valley Floodcaller doesn't die. And now I'm thinking, do I even cast this Normalize now? Because it doesn't do anything. So they're going to Return the Favor. They're going to do 2 damage to me. But the thing is that I still draw cards off of the Traumatic Critique. It just does 2 damage to me instead of 2 damage to the Otter. So if I cast Normalize right now, what am I doing? I'm saving 2 damage? But that's not worth it, right? So I might as well save the Normalize in case they play something on the next turn. So it really was a mistake for me to use that Traumatic Critique. My opponent really threw me for a loop here. I didn't know what was going on. I don't know what they're doing. And I felt a little bit unsteady. But I didn't need to do all that. You know, so what? They have a Valley Floodcaller. It's like, I'll just respond to whatever other stuff if they're going to combo off in some way. So my opponent is going to attack with this Valley Floodcaller. And nothing. So I don't know what's going on. I don't know what my opponent's doing. Don't know what they're playing. Don't know what their deal is. And I'm like, all right, I'm just going to play this land. I might as well shock it in to give myself access to a little bit more mana because now I can like 3 stabs and do the draw and discard and then also Normalize. I also did debate playing the Northwind Avatar here. I have 2 of them. But it just didn't seem, because I don't even know what I would get from the sideboard at this point. I don't know what I'm playing against. My opponent is going to not attack with the Valley Floodcaller for some reason. I have no idea why. Maybe they're thinking because I can activate the land, you know, the Biblioplex, and then block it. And it's not a very good consult because I'm consulting to try to find I'm definitely going to get a land. But even if I do that, then I'm going to have to discard the hand size. Possibly. So it's not a very good consult, even though I do get to find a land with it. But I figured I'll just do it anyway, you know, go grab a land. It's kind of good that I did that because if you look at this, there's a lot of non-lands in there, right? So I'm going to take the Helix and the Fountain because now at least I can kill the Valley Flood Caller, which I'm actually going to try to do on my turn because I don't want to discard the hand size. So it's an awkward game, man. This is an awkward game. I don't know what's going on. I don't know what my opponent's deal is. I still don't really have to worry. I mean, I'm at 14 life and they just have a Valley Flood Caller in play, which is like, you know, not doing anything right now. But I'm going to Helix the Flood Caller, and my opponent is going to respond. They respond with a Resonating Lute. So this is a control deck. It has to be a control deck if they're playing Resonating Lute. So I'm just going to cast Normalize on the Lute to see if they respond, and they don't. They don't have a counterspell. So, and it was a little bit sketched there because even the Lightning Helix, I almost made the same mistake. You see what I'm saying there? Because if they had cast 2 spells, the Lightning Helix would not have killed the Valley Flood Caller. I still think it was the right thing to do to at least try it because then it gets their spells out of their hand. It gives me an idea of what's actually going on. But I could have fallen for the same mistake there. Even so, I still think it was worth it to try the Lightning Helix, see how they respond, and they respond with a Lute. So this is a control deck. I was really not expecting that. So I'm going to cast Stock Up, get another land, which is really what I was looking for. And I'm not sure if I'm going to need the 3rd Northwind Avatar. I'm thinking maybe the Get Lost is just better. Who knows? Maybe they have a creature that they want to play that I want to get rid of. I just figured it would be unlikely if they had a Planeswalker at this point, like Elspeth or whatever, but they might have a creature that I might want to remove. So I'm actually thinking that the Get Lost might be better. I don't think I necessarily need 3 Northwind Avatars. So now I'm just going to pass the turn. There's no point in me playing one of these guys yet. I'm obviously like trying to get set up for a Jeskai Rev turn here. Get a few more counter spells. You know, I want to have a Normalize in addition to all the 3 steps, which is kind of why I'm being a little bit patient here. Seems like I could potentially run out one of these Northwinds though to go get a Jeskai Rev, but I'm probably going to hold that Jeskai Rev until I can grab a Normalize. That's also what I'm thinking here. Like I can stock up to try to get one, but then I'm gonna have to discard the hand size. Granted, you know, if I have to play this land and then I want to preferably leave it untapped so that way I can draw a discard with the 3 steps, which also avoids having to discard the hand size. But I just don't want to make a big play here without having like a Normalize on top of my 3 steps and all this stuff. So they do inevitable defeat my Northwind, unfortunately. Nothing I can do about that. Inevitable defeat is uncounterable. So I'm certainly expecting that they're going to have more of those. They might have 4 inevitable defeats in their deck, which is a little bit unfortunate for me because this is a situation where the Northwind is actually not that good. You know, having the multiples of these Northwinds in my deck, it's pretty decent against Jeskai Control because, you know, they have Get Lost and stuff, but if they get lost by Northwind, like I already got value from it, right? They have to essentially counter it for me to not get value from it. But against 4-color control, the Northwinds are a little bit more detrimental because of inevitable defeat. I can't counter it. It drains me for 3 life. It gains them 3 life. So this is a bit of a tough situation, right? This is a little bit what I was talking about in the deck tech, how this build for Jeskai Control, relying a little bit more on the Northwinds and not main decking Resonating Lute, it does make control matchups a little bit more difficult sometimes. And this is a good example of that, where the Northwinds can just get inevitable defeated, and I don't have good responses to that. Nothing from my opponent still. So I kind of want to consult here, but it's also, again, not a very good consult. I'm going to grab a land, probably. But again, I'm looking for Normalize. And there's a negate, which I definitely want. And then there's also a Jeskai Rev on the, it would have been the next card that I drew on my next turn, ironically. But, and there is a Normalize. So now I'm actually kind of second guessing myself a little bit. I don't know for sure if I want to land. It might be better just to take that Jeskai Rev. But the negate is certainly something that I was looking for. That's a bit, that's better than the Normalize. I drew a Wan Shi Tong, and now I'm going to have to discard the hand size. So this is awkward. If I play the Northwind Avatar, then I'm going to put another card in my hand. I'm still going to have to discard the hand size. They could also have another Inevitable Defeat, and then they're just going to gain 3 life again and drain me for 3. But I just didn't really have another very good play, and I thought that just discarding the hand size here was not a very good use of my turn. I would discard the Wanchutong because at this point I have so many cards in my hand I don't need to keep drawing them, right? But now by playing the Northwind, I'm thinking, you know what? I think I want to grab a Resonating Lute because having the extra mana and control mirror is very important. And if I have the Lute in play and then I can, and I find a Traumatic Critique, then I might be able to punch my opponent for tons of damage. So this is an example where the toolbox is to my advantage, even though it's a little bit to my disadvantage as well because I'm giving my opponent targets for Inevitable Defeat. So I'm thinking that I might want to use a Lightning Helix here because then I only have to discard 1 card, which would be Wanchutong. But I'm also thinking I really might want to save that Lightning Helix because it's better when I have the monks on the field, right? Now my opponent casts another Inevitable Defeat on my Northwind. And look, Inevitable Defeat's uncounterable, right? I was initially thinking, well, there's nothing I can really do here. But there actually is. I can get lost my own Northwind. And I'll actually create 2 map tokens then. My opponent won't gain 3 life. I won't lose 3 life. And I really should have done that. I just didn't see the line. I don't know. It just slipped my mind. But I really should have done that because, look, I have to discard the hand size anyway. I'm like, I'm going to discard this Get Lost because I don't have a target for it. But I could have just used it on my own creature. And then there wouldn't be a 6-point life differential. So that was a mistake. I don't know why. I was being a little absent-minded in that moment. They're going to Inevitably defeat my Resonating Lute, but I can return it to my hand with Jeskai Rev. This definitely seems worth it. My opponent loses 4 life. I gain 4 life. They don't get the... I keep my loot, but then they also don't gain 3 life off of the Inevitable defeat because it has no target. That was a good play. I've established something. I've at least answered an Inevitable defeat in pretty much the only way that I can. It's still awkward though, because now I'm thinking, well, I have 1 blue mana left over. I think if I had tapped my lands differently, it might have actually been better because then I could Lightning Helix and then I would only have to discard 1 card. But now I have to discard 2 cards. So if I had tapped my lands manually, I could have potentially left either a red or a white available. And then I could at least Lightning Helix. I would tap 1 more land, but then I would still have 2 lands left. At least as it is, I can still 3 steps in negate, but I would only have to discard the tap land. I could keep the Flood Farm Verge. So I'm going to try to counter this Ashling's command because I want to keep my monks alive. And they don't have a response, thankfully. So my monks are still alive. This is looking much better. I can play the Lute because I don't have a counterspell. And I'm actually wondering if I can potentially kill them on this turn with the Jeskai Rev and the Lightning Helix. I'm trying to do the math really quick. And it doesn't seem like I can. Because Jeskai Rev is 4 damage, Lightning Helix is 3 damage. Then I'll have 2 mana left over. I could even abrade my own Lute, but then that's only 2 more damage for the monks. It's not enough. So I'm just going to hold. I have plenty of responses to what they're going to do. I have a bunch of mana to do it as well. Nothing yet. No response from my opponent. So I'm going to go for the Jeskai Rev and have negates on the back as a response. My opponent responds with their own Jeskai Rev, which is totally fine. I can just negate it. I actually could have normalized it. It would have been better to normalize it there, because then I could save the negates. But as it is, my opponent didn't have a response after that, and I had the Lightning Helix and everything, so that game was pretty much over. But I was not expecting that, man. I was really not expecting that this is a 4-color control deck once I saw the Plunderer, right? And the Valley Floodcaller. Very different build here from my opponent. Very different 4-color control build. So I seemingly don't need the board wipes. There's very few creatures. I'm going to put the Resonating Lutes in my main deck now, so that then I can potentially find them. And Obviously, this is why I have them, right? I have them specifically for control mirrors. I put in the other Jeskai Rev, and now I'm just kind of thinking that I might want to make a few other small adjustments here because there are still a couple options that I can do. I could play a null, which might be worth it because a null hits the Resonating Lute. I'm not sure why I was debating taking out that Abrade. Oh no, that's right. I was thinking of taking out the Abrade because the Lute is so threatening, it might be more reliable to actually have it in the sideboard because then I have 3 chances to get it with the 3 Northwind avatars. That's why I wanted to do that. But it didn't seem like the right call. Just leave it in the main. I was debating putting in the Flash Freeze though, because Lightning Helix, the red creatures, right, the Plunderer, Resonating Lute, Jeskai Rev, there's a lot of red spells in that deck. But it didn't feel like enough. You know, it still probably is only, what, maybe like a third of the deck that is red for my opponent's deck. Well, it could be more than that. It might be more like 40%. But there's the Plunderer again. I don't have a response, but I don't really need it. You know, again, the Plunderer is going to give me a treasure token, just like the last game. Now, I actually made a small mistake here. I played the Plains, but that was a mistake because the Plains doesn't turn on Riverpire Verge. The Mountain does. And the Mountain also turns on my Sunbillow Verge. So that was a bit of a mistake. I was doing it because I was trying to bluff having Lightning Helix, but it's not worth it. You know, it would have been better to play the Mountain there because now it's a little bit awkward on my next turn. Because now if I play the Sunbillow Verge, I don't have access to blue. So I should play the Mountain so I have access to blue. But then, you know, the Mountain would have turned on both Verges and I could play the Sunbillow Verge. So that was a slight misstep on my part. It's not so detrimental though because I have the treasure token from the Plunderer. Interestingly enough, my opponent plays a Charming Scoundrel. I don't know what's going on, guys. Like, this was really throwing me for a loop because I took out the board wipes. I took out the board wipes because I barely saw any creatures, but now I see 2 creatures. I don't know what's going on. I figured, though, at this point, I can just kill the Plunderer. I'll be able to draw some cards, and they don't have the... I forget what that thing is, but the red spell that allows them to respond or copy the spell and choose a new target for or whatever. Because they didn't have enough mana to do that. So I figured, let me just kill this guy, draw some cards, and I found 2 lands, which is good. My opponent plays an Ashling's Command, so it's basically just draw 2 cards because they replaced 2 treasure tokens. And I actually have a few interesting choices here. I was instantly just going to pass, but then I thought, why? Like, I can just play this Lute, and they can't play that red spell again, right? Well, I guess in this case, yeah, the red spell they would be able to copy it and then make their own Lute, right? They could copy it and change the target of it for themselves. So they play Planetarium of Wanchitong, which I'm a little concerned about because they can activate the mana to scry and then start casting spells for free. So because of that, and because they use the treasures already, I'm like, if I just Jeskai Rev right now, what are they going to do? I mean, I won't be able to have Normalize as a backup, but they can't cast that Planetarium if I return it to their hand. You know, they need some way to make extra mana. And seemingly they can't do that. So this actually felt like a pretty good use of my turn. Now I can also activate the Lute and draw another card. And I'm actually thinking of using that floating white mana to just cast the Erode. It does give them a land, but they missed a land drop anyway on the last turn, so now we're just even on lands. That was a pretty good turn for me, right? Return that Planetarium. Now they seemingly can't cast it. I mean, I guess if they hit an untapped land, now they can cast it. I still wasn't that worried about it though, because then I have the monks in play, I got the Lute, and it's a good thing I cast that Jeskai Rev though, because look at what I drew. I drew nothing but lands. So actually, I think that was really good value just to try to get a little bit past the flood. So my opponent played a tapped land, which is the Starting Town, and for some reason they didn't destroy my 2 monks. I thought this was crazy. Like, I guess they were worried about me holding the gate. That's the only thing that kind of made sense for me. But still, in that situation, I think you gotta try to do the 2 damage to destroy my monks. Because, you know, look, I could have potentially killed them on this turn. I can't because I don't have the means to do it necessarily. I might find something off of this consult, but I thought that was crazy. I think in that situation, much better Ashling's Command, target yourself to draw 2 cards, and then do 2 damage to my creatures. These are really good options. Jeskai Rev, Northwind Avatar, 3 steps ahead. Really, really good choices here. I don't need the land, obviously, because I have so many lands, but I'm just trying to think if I want the 3 steps or if I want the Northwind. I'm actually thinking that the Northwind might be better because then I can not only go get the Jeskai Rev that's in my sideboard, but potentially something else like Flash Freeze or whatever. But I think at this point, you know, the Jeskai Rev that I have off of that draw is going to be enough to win me the game. So that's why I decided to take 3 steps just to try to have more answers to their spells, right? It seems like I'm just going to win with the monks and with this other Jeskai Rev, but this is just such a wacky game, y'all. Like, I was really, like, surprised at how this was, like, what was going on, what I was playing against, all this stuff. So now if they cast the Planetarium, they actually do have enough mana to pay for Normalize. That's not what they're doing. They're going to cast Inevitable Defeat, and I'm kind of thinking, well, I can respond with a Jeskai Rev, but then I might not be able to do anything if they have a counterspell. And that's why I didn't do it. They play Generous Plunderer, which I'm wondering if it's better to Get Lost this guy or Normalize this guy. And I think it's, ultimately, I think the Get Lost is better. Because I wanted to save the Normalize for bigger spells that they have, like their own Jeskai Rev or whatever, you know, on top of having my 3 steps. So I do still have enough lands here to Jeskai Rev, but I'm not really thinking that it's worth it. I'm thinking it's better just to stock up, trigger the Prowess on my monks, and then just hold up mana after that. I do have 2 Normalize, which is pretty nice. I was also very glad to see that Lightning Helix. I'm thinking just Lightning Helix, and I don't need the land, of course. I have lands. I'm wondering if it's better to get this Get Lost or this stock up. I'm actually thinking the Get Lost might be better, because if they play any creature, I would rather kill it with Get Lost, even if it's a small creature, and then save the Lightning Helix so that I can Lightning Helix them directly. I'm also thinking that it might be better to just hold this Lightning Helix instead of casting it right now, because look, I got 1 more Jeskai Rev on the way. So if I'm patient, I might be able to Lightning Helix after the next Jeskai Rev, and then that should end the game. There was one thing that I was thinking when all this was happening though, which is, am I playing a little bit too conservatively? It was kind of like in that moment there when I cast the stock up and I was looking at those cards, I was thinking, man, am I playing too conservatively? Because like, I have a Jeskai Rev and I can't cast it now because I'm doing all this other stuff. And I also don't have the mana to Jeskai Rev and Helix on this turn. See, I'm counting it up. I only have 8, but that would have ended the game right there. I think really I actually was playing a little bit too conservatively. I think it would have been better to just kind of get a little bit more aggressive with my spells, because I don't want to give my opponent room to like find more answers and stuff like that. The last turn cycle was good because I got to play 2 Normalize and counter their Planetarium, which was very necessary because otherwise they start casting spells for free. But I still think I was playing a little bit too conservatively. Now what I'm doing here is I'm just checking the numbers with the land, because the land also gets +1/+0 if I cast a spell. And if I animate the land and Lightning Helix, then it's exactly 10 damage. So I had lethal anyway. But even so, I do think I was playing just a little bit too conservatively on those last couple turns. But still, very interesting 4-color control build from my opponent. I was really not expecting that when I saw the Valley Flood Caller in the first game. All right, here's my opening hand for the first game of the 3rd match. Looks pretty good. Lightning Helix, stock up, Northwind Avatar. That Jeskai Rev in the opening hand is never really that good, right? And my opponent's starting with a Chocobo and they're on the play, so this is obviously Landfall, and I'm like, oh boy. So, look, anytime you're playing a control deck and you're going up against a tier 1 deck, especially a tier 1 aggro deck, it's a little intimidating, right? But you try to keep a level head. my hand is still pretty good. And I'm actually pausing here because I'm thinking it might be better to just remove the Chocobo right now. It seems like it's mono green landfall, but I don't know for sure. But if it's mono green landfall, I was worried about the Archdruid's Charm, which can actually put a ++1 counter on the Chocobo. So if they had gone land Archdruid's Charm, the Lightning Helix would not have killed it. Now that's a narrow line, but the Chocobo is such a problem. Like, I really wanted to, you know, make sure that I got rid of it. So I'm just waiting for Ultima at this point. Look at this turn that my opponent has with the Earthbender Ascension plus a Keen-Eye Curator. It's pretty nasty, right? But look, I'm just trying to get to Ultima, right? That's the goal. So I can certainly stock up here. I don't need to worry too much about the Earthbender Ascension yet. I have the answer, which is Get Lost. And these are a couple nice options. The Flanker is attractive because there's a Fabled Passage in the graveyard. So if they, you know, if they cast an Ice Till Explorer on the next turn, then I'm probably just going to lose the game. But if they don't, then I can cast the Flanker in response to an Ice Till. And the Flanker can also block one of the creatures. Now, that doesn't matter so much if my opponent is getting trample, which now they do, because it's got the Earthbender has got 4 counters on it. This is also a huge hit. Look, it's going to be 8 because of the Myform Harmonizer. So this is not looking great. Still, though, I think the Flanker was a good pickup because I can get rid of the Fabled Pass in the graveyard. They at least have no cards in hand, right? So I'm down to 10. It's a little bit nerve-wracking. And the next turn could be bad because if they play the Harmonizer and a land and then give the Keen-Eye Curator trample and double the power, then I'm probably going to have to Get Lost the Keen-Eye. And I don't want to because I would rather Get Lost the Earthbender Ascension. That's actually what I'm wondering if I should do right now. Like, should I Get Lost the Earthbender Ascension in response to that Myform Harmonizer? I decided not to because it seemed like they had a land, but I didn't know for sure. And if they didn't have a land, then this turn was no big deal, even if they had the Myform Harmonizer. So that's why I didn't Get Lost the Earthbender Ascension. Now, my opponent actually made a pretty big mistake here. They put the counter on the Elves instead of on the Keen-Eyed. So now I can just chump block the Keen-Eyed, right? I guess that what they were thinking is that I was holding Get Lost, and they're right, I am. So maybe that's why they didn't want to put the counters on the Keen-Eyed, because if they did, then I would just kill it with Get Lost. So that actually was a correct assumption, but still, like, if I have like Wanchitong, you know, if I have any creature, then I can just block the Keen-Eyed. So I think that was a little mistake. I do think my opponent should have just given the Keen-Eye trample, and I would have been forced to Get Lost it. My opponent's still way ahead. They got 2 Bossing Says in play. They're going to Earthbend this land. They actually Earthbend the other Bossing Say, which I think was a mistake. Because, I mean, look, what if they get to enough lands to activate both? I don't think that would happen necessarily, but I think my opponent Earthbending the Bossing Say was a mistake because you could potentially use both Bossing Says to... Now, if you try to use this Bossing Say to Earthbend a land, and that Bossing Say can't attack because you've tapped it. See what I'm saying? So if I'm going to erode something, then I should probably do it while they don't have a creature in play that's going to get a ++1 counter from the Ascension. So I'm actually thinking maybe I should erode this Bossing Say. The landfall trigger happens, but then it doesn't matter. The Earthbender Ascension doesn't go on anything. And then I'm wondering, like, should I Get Lost the Earthbender Ascension? Well, that doesn't seem so good because then they Bossing Say, and then they hit me for 2, and then I go down to 1, right? None of it looks that good. This is so strange, but what I'm actually thinking of doing is just killing both creatures. It seems like they're going to Earthbend another land with the other Bossing Say, right? So why don't I just kill them both? I mean, they're going to get tons of landfall triggers off it. But if they don't have a creature in play, doesn't matter. So you can see I'm kind of paying for that now because they play a Badgerable Cub, which is definitely not what I want to see. This is so bad because now if I erode the Earthbended land and I kill the other Earthbended land, then there's tons of landfall triggers. All those counters go on the Badgerable Cub, and now I need to find another removal spell for the Badgerable Cub, right? This just sucks, right? But look, even so, maybe this is still the right line because it's preserving my life total. I only have 3 life. Like, if I had Get Lost the Earthbender Ascension and then killed the land, then they would be able to just hit me for 1 here off of the Earthbended land on the Badgerable Club. I would go down to 2. So then one Earthbend off of the Bossing Say would kill me. So it sucks no matter what, but I still think that this was the right thing. Now, I played the Earth. This is important. I played the Erode first because I knew that they were going to get multiple landfall triggers. And I knew that they were going to put the counters on the other land because they want to try to kill me. So then they only get one counter on the Badgermole Cub. See, if I had killed the other land with the Get Lost and then eroded, all of those counters would have gone on the Badgermole Cub, which might be an issue, right? So now at least some of those counters were wasted because they went on the other land. I was also thinking, look, I'm at 6 lands. If I get an untapped land, I can Jeskai Rev. And Jeskai Rev would be great because then I might be able to kill this Badgermole, right? I mean, not if they play a land off of the top of their, you know, I might have to do it on my turn or on their upkeep or something. But unfortunately, I have a tapped land. So now I need to answer this Badgermole. And what do I do? If I play Northwind, I could potentially have a creature to block. If I cast Stock Up, though, I could potentially dig deep to try to find a removal spell for the Badgermole Cub. It would have to be Get Lost at this point. I'm also wondering, is there anything in my sideboard that I can get? Because if there is, then I have a blocker for the Earthbended land, and I can get that thing in my sideboard. And I do. I have the Seam Rip. Look at this, guys. Look at this toolbox. Look at it. Saved this game for me. It absolutely saved this game for me. Even if they play an Ice Steel Explorer right now, and they get the lands out of there. Actually, I don't remember if they have a land in their graveyard or not right now. But okay, so they do have an Ice Steel Explorer, and they have a 4th. But it doesn't matter. I have Jeskai Rev. The toolbox with the Northwind Avatar, and specifically the Seam Rip, saved this game for me. Because now I have a blocker on the field, the Northwind Avatar, a good blocker too, because it's a 5/5. And I got the Seam Rip for the Badgermole Cub, which had all the counters on it from the Earthbender Ascension. Now I have a Jeskai Rev. It literally saved this game for me. Now I actually might win because I can Jeskai Rev. I'm going to gain life. I'm going to get 2 more blockers. I can return something to their hand, which would probably be the Ice Steel Explorer so that they can't attack. There's no other lands in the graveyard either. So even though this is not a build that people are doing with the toolbox, with the Northwind Avatar and using it this way, just look at this. It absolutely saved this game for me. So initially I was thinking of just putting a stop on the upkeep to do the Jeskai Rev, but then I actually stopped because I was like, wait a minute, the graveyards. I have a land. See, look, they're exiling my road. I have a land and they have sorcery and creature. That Keen-Eye Curator is going to get huge at instant speed. So I want to kill it with the Jeskai Rev so they don't have creatures. So I needed to do it on my end step because I needed to make sure I get rid of it so they can't respond by exiling all the things in the graveyards, and bounce the Ice Steel so that now I can't attack this turn. So, but now they found a Fabled Passage, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because I should be able to find enough answers here between the Consult the Star charts and the Stock Up. You know, I even have Wanshi Tong to block, which could be enough. You know, look at all this toughness I'm going to have if I play the Wanshi Tong, right? Like, and if it's going to get bigger with the Fabled Passage. Instead, I decided to just cast the Consult, though, and I'm only casting Consult for 2 because I want to try to find a Get Lost for the Ice Steel. I didn't find it, and honestly, these options aren't really that good. I'm actually thinking that the Helix might be the best option just to gain some life. Now, if I stock up and I find another Helix, oh no, wait, actually I can't because I don't have enough lands, but I wanted to stock up anyway to just see if I could find a Get Lost. And I do. All right, there it is. And I can Get Lost the Ice Steel. They're going to have no creatures again. And then I have some interesting options, you know, like, do I take a Braid? Do I take a Northwind? I'm thinking the Northwind probably not, because at this point, what would I get from my sideboard that's super important? I mean, I could go get the other Jeskai Rev, but I'm actually thinking that maybe the Abrade is good because I can destroy an Earthbended land. Again, though, if I get the Northwind, then I get a big blocker and the other Jeskai Rev, right? That's in my sideboard. But I decided to go with the Abrade just to try to kill something. Possibly. I can kill this Ice Steel Explorer, and then they just give up at that point. So again, the toolbox saved that game for me. If I didn't have the toolbox, I was dead. I was dead because I couldn't cast a Jeskai Rev in my hand. I needed and more specifically, I needed this specific build with the Seam Rip in the sideboard. Like, I needed that Seam Rip. It's really cool. Like, it's really exciting, actually. It's really awesome to kind of do it this way. So honestly, I was taking a minute to sideboard there because I was trying to catch my breath because that game really took a lot out of me. I mean, I was really close to losing. So, as it is, 3 steps ahead is not good against Landfall if you're on the draw. It's too slow. Normalize is not that good either because they have so many lands. They can easily pay the 3. And plus the Badgermo Cub, which makes them tap for extra mana. Instead, I'm going to put in the counter spells that are more effective, like Flash Freeze, Annul for Sapling Nursery, and the Earthbender Ascension, because this is seemingly mono green Landfall, right? So they probably have Sapling Nursery. I also wanted to put in Disdainful Stroke, again, Sapling Nursery, Mightform Harmonizer, and Ice Toe Explorer. That's a lot of targets. And I decided just, let me just take out the Normalize. Because if I was on the play, I'd probably keep a couple Normalize in. But being on the draw against Landfall, like, no, that's just stupid. They're going to have so many lands. And I was initially thinking of putting in the Pinnacle Starcades, but that's a little bit sketchy. Because, look, it gets rid of the lands, it gets rid of all the Sapling Nursery tokens, right? It gets rid of the Elves, the Cub, the Chocobo. It gets rid of a lot of stuff. But it's a little bit sketch because if they have Earthbended lands, those are Landfall triggers. So I was thinking maybe it's better choice to have in the sideboard still because maybe I can, use it at some point if I really need to as like a fail-safe option, tutoring up Northwind. And I said inside just to put in 1 Rest in Peace and still leave 1 in the sideboard. Rest in Peace is good in this matchup because of the Ice Toe Explorer, right? So I think that was kind of the best I could do with what I have. Being on the draw against Landfall is kind of tough. Also, seeing another tap land on tough is kind of tough. And I wanted to bin that Thundering Falls, but I can't risk it because what if there's no land underneath there? I need to hit land 3. This is also a little bit awkward because with the Biblioplex, I can't cast Wanshitong. So if they went Earthbender Ascension right now, it would be great to play Wanshitong, but I can't because the Biblioplex only taps for instants and sorceries. So I actually think I'm going to consult here, and I'm consulting just to get another land. And I'm thinking that it's not so bad to use a consult because if I can cast Wanshitong, then I'm going to draw cards, right? So it's a good thing I did that because, well, maybe it's not really that necessary because wouldn't I have drawn that? I think I would have drawn that Flood Farm cards anyway, right? Because on top of my library, but still, I think using the consult is fine. I can draw cards off of Wanshitong. I have stock up, I got the critique right there. I'm going to be able to dig through the deck here, so just smooth out the draw a little bit, make sure I get a land. I also found another land after that, which is welcome. So now the cast Earthbender Ascension, this is what I wanted. So now I'm going to Wanshitong, and I'm going to draw a card, and then Wanshitong is going to get bigger. This is perfect, right? Even though I'm on the draw, and seemingly being on the draw against Landfall is a disadvantage. This is great. And I got lucky, though, because my opponent got off to a slow start. They didn't have Land of Werewolves turn 1. They just played the Escape Tunnel. And then they didn't have anything turn 2 either, necessarily. But this is great. Look, Wanshitong grows. I draw a card. Great stuff. And they play a Fabled Passage. Now, if they want to sack that passage, Wanshitong's going to grow again. This is just awesome. This is exactly what you want when you're playing Jeskai Control and you're going up against Landfall. So I do still have some options here because I can play the Critique, right? If I play the Critique, I can kill the Llanowar Elves, which, look, I mean, I could potentially get more value from the Critique later. But, I mean, look, at the same time, I get to draw some cards. I have a couple extra lands here. Maybe I want to discard one of those to the Critique and find some more gas. I could also maybe discard this Ultima, even though Ultima is awesome in this matchup because it gets rid of the Earthbended lands. But at this point, I don't want to destroy Wanshitong. Wanshitong is going to crush this game, So I'm thinking maybe the Ultima is not worth it at this point. There's an Abrade on top, which is actually probably good. They are not going to really have artifacts that I can destroy, but still, Abrade is, if I kill something while it's still small, a Chocobo or an Earthbended land, whatever, like, the Earthbended land would get a Landfall trigger, but, I think the Abrade is probably fine to keep on top. So I'm going to critique this elf and draw that Abrade and see what else I got. And I got something good. I got a flanker. And there is a couple of fetch lands in the graveyard. There's a Escape Tunnel and a Fabled Passage. So that flanker is going to do some work right now. It's not going to do anything if my opponent plays an Ice Toe Explorer on this next turn. Because for one thing, they might not even sack the lands then. It's still good if they don't play Ice Toe Explorer on the next turn. So I am thinking of just getting rid of this ultimate. You know, look, I got Northwind Avatar coming up, right? I don't want to destroy my creatures. My creatures are good. But it is a little bit sketch because if my opponent has a lot of earthbended lands, if they go wide with like sapling nursery tokens and all this stuff, and I want to wipe the board, the ultimate will not trigger a landfall, will not allow for landfall triggers to happen because the earthbended, it ends the turn. The landfall, the earthbended trigger doesn't happen. So there is an argument to be made to keep the Ultima and maybe like discard one of my lands. But I thought the Wanshi Tong was too valuable, right, to have it die. So there's a sapling nursery. I didn't have a response anyway. I had no null or anything. So, but no land drop yet. So I still get a free attack with the Wanshi Tong. And more importantly, I can play the flanker now in response to an Icetool Explorer. Icetool Explorer with the 2 fetch lands in the grave would be horrible right now with the Earthbender Ascension and the Sapling Nursery in play. I'm not looking too bad. I can braid something too, right? Like it's not bad. Now the one thing is that with a landfall trigger, they'll make a token with the Sapling Nursery and then they'll put a counter on it with the Earthbender Ascension. And then that token will be too big for Wanshi Tong. So that's unfortunate. My opponent warps in my Foam Harmonizer, so it clearly seems like a land is coming. I'm just hoping it's not a fetch land. It's not. It's just a regular forest. So they get the token. They're going to put a ++1 counter on something. And they get to double the power of something. So they put the counter on the Sapling Nursery token, which is exactly what I was afraid of, because now Wanshi Tong can't attack into it. And then they're going to put double the power of the forest. I'm thinking that might be okay, but then they play an Earthbender Ascension. So now what I'm thinking is Northwind Avatar and go get that the Pinnacle Star Cage and get rid of all the Sapling Nursery tokens. What I'm also thinking here is, man, you know, this is going to be a big attack with this land. So do I abrade this land? Because this is going to be a big attack. You know, they're going to put a counter on it, and then, or no, they'll probably put the counter on the Sapling Nursery token. But, you know, that land would attack for a lot of damage. And I don't necessarily care about the landfall triggers at this point and them getting more Sapling Nursery tokens because I'm going to get Pinnacle Star Cage. So to kind of nullify the Myform Harmonizer trigger, I decided to abrade it. And in retrospect, I actually don't think I needed to do that. I think it would have been fine to take that 8 damage, or I think it would have been 8 damage. It could have been 10 if they put the counter on it, though. I still think it would have been fine. But I was thinking that, look, they get a token off of the Sapling Nursery, but I'm just going to go get Pinnacle Star Cage anyway, right? So that's why I did that. So that's what I'm doing. I'm playing the Northwind. I'm going to go Pinnacle Star Cage. But there's one thing that I realized here, which is that they can Earthbend a land with Bossing Say, which they're probably going to do. Then when I Pinnacle Star Cage, it's going to get rid of that land, but it's going to return to the battlefield. So that's going to be more landfall triggers. Now, they get the tree token, but the real concern is the Earthbender Ascension, the one that's got 5 counters on it. Because that tree folk token is going to be a 4/5, and Wanshi Tong can't attack into it. Now, the Avatar will be able to attack into it, so maybe that's not so bad. But it doesn't feel that good, does it? You see what I'm saying? Like, if I play this, the Pinnacle Star Cage is still really good because it's going to get rid of all the sapling tokens, and they might get a million of these guys based on how many lands they play in the next turn or two, right? But it's still sketch because of the forest that's earthbended, and they might earthbend another land as well. So that's just, they're going to get 2, what do you call it? 2 4/5s, and Wanshi Tong can't attack. That doesn't feel that good. So what I want to do is before I Pinnacle Star Cage, I want to remove the Earthbender Ascension. So that's why I was going to initially cast Consult the Star Charts to try to find a Get Lost. But then I'm thinking, wait a minute, I have a Jeskai Rev in my hand. If I just send that Earthbender Ascension back to my opponent's hand at the end of their next turn, then it doesn't matter how many Sapling Nursery tokens they have. They're all going to go away with Pinnacle Star Cage. And then when the Earthbended lands return, the other Earthbender Ascension will probably not get to 4 counters. I mean, if they had a fetch land here, then it would. Look, you can only play around so much stuff, right? If they have a fetch land, they have a fetch land. But you see what I'm saying? By doing it this way and being a little bit patient and using the Jeskai Rev to get rid of that Earthbender Ascension, now when the sapling token comes back from the landfall trigger from the forest that's Earthbended, it's only going to be a 3-4. So Wan Chitong and Northwind Avatar can attack. They might block, but then the token is dead. It's crazy, y'all. It's such a weird line for me to be taking, but it really felt like this was the best I could do. You know, like they can replay that Earthbender Ascension, then the other Earthbender Ascension will get the 4 counters. But at that point, I might just have the game. You know, I might have enough answers or whatever. And you can see what's going on here in this turn, right? They play the Marform Harmonizer, they play a Forest, they get this big 10-10 guy, or this 10-6 guy, but I don't need to block it. I can just let it go and take 10 damage with the Jeskai Rev coming down. So they're gonna have to block because they're gonna be at 9 life and I have 9 damage in the air. This feels like the best thing to do. Now, there's a downside to this, which is I lose my Monk tokens. But I'm not trying to win with the Monk tokens anyway. This was the right thing to do. Now when they get the landfall trigger off of the other land coming back, it's only going to be 1 Tree Folk token that's a 3-4. My opponent just gives up anyway, even though the game wasn't over because they could block. But that line won me the game. And again, in the other game, the toolbox with the seam rip, it saved that game for me. All right, here's my opening hand for the first game of the 4th match. And this really isn't that good, you know, just having negate and consult. If that negate was a normalize, it might actually be keepable, but as it is, that's not going to work. And neither is this one, you know, just 2 Flood Farm Verges, and the only thing that I could cast in my hand was a Get Lost. This 5 is actually noticeably better than the 7 and 6 that I saw before. I at least have removal and a counterspell, and the Quarry Mountain Monastery might actually help me look through the deck a little bit. And as you can see, I'm going up against Azorius Momo. At least probably Azorius Momo. You know, it could be a Jeskai deck as well. Which might be an issue, you know, being short on cards, since the Momo decks are able to generate a lot of value between Quantum Riddler and Starfield Shepherd. Now I'm pausing because I'm trying to think what can they do on their second turn that would be the worst for me. It would actually be Springleaf Drum plus Sage of the Skies, because they're going to get 2 Sages. So that's why I actually decided to remove Momo here. Is because if they do Springleaf Drum Sage, the game's probably over. Like, I don't really have a good way to come back from that. And they just follow up with an Air Nomad Legacy. Now, Air Nomad Legacy is an interesting card. You don't really see that played very often. But I actually put out an Azorius Flyers list a few months ago that was Momo and Riddler and Starfield Shepherd and all that stuff. And I played Air Nomad Legacy in that deck. It's not a card that sees a lot of play, but look, it buffs your whole board if you have nothing but flyers, right? So it's pretty interesting to see my opponent playing that. And they run out a Sky Coach Conductor. This is also a nice addition to the Flyers Momo decks. And I'm thinking it is probably good to just erode that, because otherwise they can save their creatures at instant speed with the Blink spell, the all aboard Blink spell. My opponent plays a Spyglass Siren. So again, this is a different shell. This is a different shell from the Azorius Momo decks that were being played at the Pro Tour. It's a bit of a different shell from the Azorius Momo decks that have been played prior to the Pro Tour as well. More Spyglass Sirens, and Air Nomad Legacy. And I kind of like it, you know, I kind of dig it. I think that this is an interesting build. So I am going to use the draw and discard here on the 3 steps. It really doesn't feel great, but I got to try to find some more action. And this kind of sucks. You know, I have a land and a stock up, and I decided to get rid of the normalize, but then I drew a land anyway. I think in retrospect that was a mistake, because the stock up could have helped me find an untapped land. I was just worried about, you know, not getting an untapped land, and then just not getting a 5th land, but I ended up drawing the 5th land anyway. I think that was a mistake. I don't think I needed to get rid of that normalize. These are actually some pretty good options, you know, Lightning Helix and Northwind Avatar. I don't really need the 7th land right now. So this is actually good, and Northwind Avatar is also good in this matchup because it's a 5/5 flyer, right? It can pretty much block almost anything in their deck. And I am considering Lightning Helixing the Spyglass Siren because they don't have the Aang available yet. They're going to draw it on their next turn. I'm just thinking, like, do they have a counter spell? Probably not. You know, these Azorius Momo decks don't typically main deck counter spells. I actually did in my build, but it's not very common. They're just going to crack the clue, draw the Yang. I can at least get rid of the Siren. So I do need to be careful with this Aang because they're going to send my Northwind avatar away, which would not be good. So, but I drew a Wan Shutong. I'm getting a little bit lucky. You know, I made that little mistake discarding the Normalize as opposed to discarding the land. But then it ended up not being so bad because I found a Wan Shutong, right? I also found a Lightning Helix off of the stock up, which was good. So a little bit unlucky with the mulligan down to 5, but then having a little bit of luck after a small misstep. They play a second Air Nomad Legacy. This is very rare. You know, it's very rare to see one copy of Air Nomad Legacy in these decks, and it's even more rare to see multiple copies of Air Nomad Legacy in these decks. So I'm going to run out the Wan Shutong. It actually can block and kill the Yang, so it's going to be a 5/5. But they're going to use Get Lost on it. So much for that, but at least I get to draw some cards. And good options. You know, I got a Lightning Helix, I got Flow State. Unfortunately, Lightning Helix isn't really going to kill that much here with 2 Air Nomads on the field. It won't even kill the Restless Anchorage. I'm actually considering running out this Northwind Avatar, though, because they only have 1 card in hand. It might not be an Aang or like an Aven Interrupter or something like that. But I decided to cast the Flow State. For one thing, if I find a land, then I can still cast the Northwind Avatar. And there is a land there, and a couple other good options too. There's a Traumatic Critique and a Consult. And Consult is certainly an attractive thing, but it's kind of getting to this point where I might be able to kind of match their spells and their board. And I might need to just go for the burn strategy to actually win. You know, this Lightning Helix might not kill anything. I might just Lightning Helix them directly. Northwind Avatar can go find Jeskai Rev. You see what I'm saying? And then Traumatic Critique can kind of get the job done, maybe. So that's why I'm actually thinking of taking it. You know, I might just have to kind of fall back on just trying to burn them out with my spells, because it does seem like I'm going to be able to match their board fairly well enough with 19 life that I'm not going to get overrun. So I am thinking of just running out this Northwind Avatar and getting Jeskai Rev in my sideboard. And they actually concede. So an early concession there from my opponent that was a little bit surprising. You know, look, they still had stuff. They had maps. They had the clue token from the Air Nomad Legacy. So it's a little disappointing that my opponent conceded there, because really they were playing pretty well. And it's not like I was so far ahead that they didn't have any options. So I was a little sorry to see that. The Flanker doesn't do anything in this matchup. The Pinnacle Starcade does. It's pretty good because it gets rid of the map tokens, the clue tokens, and gets rid of Momo, Spyglass, Siren, any other early creatures that they may have. And I'm just trying to think of what else might be good here. You know, there are a few other things that are a little bit attractive, you know, potentially Pyroclasm, but maybe not, because a lot of their creatures do have 3 toughness. Maybe Seam Rip, although I really like having Seam Rip in the sideboard, as you saw in the other games, because tutoring it up with Northwind Avatar is really good. And I decided to put in the Disdainful Stroke because for sure they're going to have Quantum Riddler in here, and they probably have Starfield Shepherd as well. Both of those spells, even though if they're warped, they're 5-mana spells, so I can actually counter those. This opening hand is not good, and this one is not that good either. You know, that first one, I only had access to red and blue mana and a decent assortment of spells, but not really much way to guarantee that I can cast them without having white. So this is also not that great, but it is a manageable hand. I did draw a Lightning Helix, which was fantastic, and then I surveil a stock up on top, which is also really good. So it ended up not being so bad. You know, this was a better hand than the other one that I saw. My opponent plays a Malcolm. And now I'm thinking, I was hoping to save the Lightning Helix for like an Aang, maybe an Aven Interrupter if they play that, or the Sky Coach, but Malcolm's a good card. It gets a lot of value, so now I'm thinking I might just need the Lightning Helix this guy. You know, maybe with stock up I can find a board wipe, or I just find more answers. And they follow up with Empyrean Eagle. So it's actually, this deck is looking very similar to the one that I made. This is very similar to the Azorius Momo deck that I showcased a few months ago. You can find it on my channel. I had Empyrean Eagle, I had Air Nomad Legacy, I had Malcolm. Since then, I actually have played that deck a little bit more, but I've made some changes to it. I'm not sure if I'm going to make a video about it. I've thought about making an update to that deck, but you know, as it is, I haven't yet, but I have made some changes, and it actually is one of my favorite decks to play. My opponent runs out a second Momo, and I'm a little bit concerned about what's going on here because, you know, like they can crack this map, and now if this map hits, they're going to hit me for 7. I don't have a board wipe, and then there's also an Aven Interrupter on top, which they're going to draw off of the Malcolm. So this actually isn't looking that great. You know, now I have to kind of stock up to find an answer. You know, the second stock up was a bit of an issue. It would have been better to find another piece of interaction there. Same thing with the second Northwind Avatar, you know, just kind of getting these clunkier spells. At this point, I'm just going to draw and discard because I need to try to find answers. And really what I'm looking for is a Lightning Helix. You know, the Get Lost is a decent find, but I'm really looking for a Lightning Helix that I'm hoping I can kind of like bait out in some way. I mean, I could bait out the Aven Interrupter with another spell like the Get Lost or the stock up and then cast Lightning Helix. I didn't find it, but as it is, I can actually still survive a turn with just Get Lost and Wan Shi Tong. So I can Get Lost the Empyrean Eagle. They'll probably cast the Aven Interrupter in response, but then I can play Wan Shi Tong after that to block one of the flyers. So I actually can still survive a turn. So I'm going to Get Lost the Eagle. I'm obviously expecting that they're going to interrupt it. And they actually didn't, which I was very surprised about. So now I'm going to try to cast Wan Shi Tong. I'm expecting that they're going to interrupt this, which is actually fine because then I can stock up to try to find something, and preferably a Lightning Helix. I mean, I still might lose the game, but you know, baiting out the Aven Interrupter with the Wan Shi would not be bad in this scenario. And that is what happens. And I found a Day of Judgment, so this is the answer, right? But, you know, if they have anything, Aven Interrupter, well, they can't Aven Interrupt, but if they have any counterspell here, then I am going to lose. Yeah, and they just have Disdainful Stroke. So, actually, if they didn't have that Disdainful Stroke, I was actually fine. I would have held on, but, you know, as it is, they just had the answers. That was a bit of a difficult match. You know, they had a lot of cheap creatures there and kept playing a threat every single turn. The Empyrean Eagle early on was a big detriment. So I am kind of considering putting in this Pyroclasm. Pyroclasm actually would have been decent in that matchup, even though it doesn't kill the Eagle, it doesn't kill Aang, it doesn't kill the Sky Coach, right? I am going to throw in this Seam Rip. Again, I like having it in the sideboard, but I think in this matchup it's just a little bit too relevant to not put in. Doesn't only hit the creatures, but also hits the Air Nomad Legacy, and it might get under some of their interaction. I actually didn't realize this when I sideboarded during the previous game, but the Ultima and the Pinnacle Starcage is a bit of an asymmetry, so that's one thing that you always need to be a little bit careful about when you're sideboarding with this deck, at least if you're doing this kind of build with Starcage and Ultima, because that's an asymmetry. You know, you don't want to give them back their stuff that's underneath the Starcage. So I decided to put in the Pyroclasm instead, and I have access to the Ultima and Pyroclasm in the sideboard with the Northwind if I really need it. This opening hand is really good. This is the best opening hand that I've had this match. Start with the Surveil land, then I have Seam Rip, Erode, stock up a lot of great stuff. There's another land on top. It's a Quarry Mountain Monastery. I really want a white land because I have 2 white spells. So I really actually thought about binning this, but I decided not to. You know, look, if there's no land under there, then missing land drops would suck. So I'm only going to Seam Rip this Momo. Nothing from my opponent yet, but obviously they could have Malcolm or whatever. They could have anything. It feels like a good idea to stock up though. And this is a bit of a tough choice. The Helix is definitely attractive. It kills so many targets. But do I take a land? You know, especially another white land. Do I take the Normalize? Do I take the Disdainful Stroke? This is pretty hard. I really debated taking the Flood Farm Verge because I want the next white source. But I'm also thinking, man, am I really not going to have a counterspell right now? So I decided to take the Normalize. I think that was a bit of a mistake. You know, you can definitely argue that it would have been better to take the white land there, the Flood Farm Verge. But I went with the Normalize. I didn't want to not have a counterspell. And they run out the Ademi on the previous turn, which is a really excellent choice to sideboard for them. And they run out of Sky Coach as well. So this is really hard. I'm feeling a little bit insecure as well because I feel like it would have been good to take the white land now, because if I counter this, then I don't have a road. If I erode the Ademi, then I don't have the counterspell. I don't have Lightning Helix, right? So now I'm kind of feeling a little bit unsettled because I'm regretting not taking the Flood Farm Verge. Sometimes it's a little bit tough, you know, in these games, especially when you're playing Control, and these little decisions end up making a big difference, and you start to second guess yourself a little bit. As it is, I actually do think it's the two best options here are either to erode the Ademi or counter the Sky Coach. I don't want to necessarily counter the Sky Coach. If I do that, I don't have a counterspell for Aven Interrupter or Aang. And those creatures trigger when they enter, so it's not like my removal spells are that great if they Aang or interrupt my spells. But using Erode on Ademi, I felt like also wasn't that great in that moment because I didn't want to necessarily ramp them. And I was kind of hoping that I could maybe get an untapped white land. I mean, it's obviously unlikely because I've been in the Flood Farm Verge, but at least it's an Archive, which is a white land. And then there's also a Hallowed Fountain on top. So the draws ended up smoothing out a little bit anyway with these couple of lands, but I really should have taken that Flood Farm Verge. I'm going to try to negate this Ademi. I'm going to try to negate the Ademi. I'm going to try to Lightning Helix the Ademi, but my opponent has a negate. That's actually not so bad. I'd rather that they negate a Lightning Helix as opposed to one of my stronger spells, right? Like Day of Judgment that I have in my hand. And I'm going to play this land tapped. There's no reason to play it untapped. Now I can erode and consult. And I am going to erode away this Ademi at this point because I have enough lands now. If I give them a land, I'm not going to necessarily be behind. And I do need to get rid of this Ademi because otherwise none of my removal spells are really going to do anything with that thing still on the field. So now I can consult. If they interrupt or Aang it, then so be it. They don't, it resolves. And these are also excellent options. Normalize, Abrade, Northwind Avatar. I'm definitely thinking of taking the Abrade because it kills so many things in their deck. So many of the things with 3 toughness. And then I decided to take the land just because I have a Jeskai Rev in my hand. If I didn't have the Jeskai Rev, then I would have taken the Northwind Avatar. They run out of Malcolm, which I'm thinking I would rather save the Abrade for a stronger one of their creatures, like the Eagle, the Sky Coach, the Aangs, whatever. But I don't want them to get the value of the Malcolm, so I'm just going to try to Abrade it. And they're not going to airbend my Abrade because that would accomplish nothing, right? But they are going to airbend away their Malcolm so that they can replay it. And I at least get to activate my Quarry Mountain Monastery. And I found an Elegant Parlor, which is good. The rare land off of the Monastery is always a good thing. And there's a Lightning Helix on top, which is also good. So I'm very much in control now, right? I'm very much in a comfortable place. I don't really need to worry too much. They play their Malcolm. And what I'm realizing is that they only have 2 lands. There are 2 mana left, so they can't interrupt me. They can't Aang me either. I mean, they already have an Aang, so if they play a second Aang, then only one of them would be able to remain because it's legendary. But I am thinking of using this Jeskai Rev. Because what are they going to do? They can normalize, they can negate, they can disdainful stroke, but so what? You know, I'm at 11 life. They're not going to kill me next turn. At least it's very unlikely that they're going to kill me next turn. So I might as well try it because I have another one in my hand. I have a Lightning Helix coming up and a Day of Judgment. You know, I have all these things to follow up with. If they counter this, it's not having a big deal. So there's no point to return the Seam Rip. There's no point to return the Aang either because then they can just recast the Aang, and that's something I don't want. Just return a land, do damage to the Malcolm, and that's it. My opponent conceded again. So again, it's disappointing to see that my opponent conceded early in 2 of those games. I think that they really weren't doing that poorly. They were doing pretty well. But it was interesting to see a different build for the Azorius Momo archetype. So I hope you all enjoyed this gameplay featuring my unique take on Jeskai Control. As I said before, this build is just super fun. I really like Northwind Avatar. I'm very impressed with this card. And it's just cool, man. Like, again, you know, I've won games without playing Jeskai Rev at all. You know, just pulling something important from the sideboard. Maybe it's High Noon, maybe it's Rest in Peace, whatever. And then just winning with the dragon. Again, I really appreciate those of you who joined me in the streams and helped me put this list together. And this build has been performing pretty well for me. This is the current record of the deck. It's nothing super crazy, but look, this is pretty good, especially since it's still kind of early in this rank season. You know, everybody who's in Platinum right now was in Mythic or Diamond last season. Even though Jeskai Control did not necessarily perform that well at the last Pro Tour, I actually do think it's well positioned to make some noise in the current landscape. I just don't think those lists that were played at the Pro Tour actually were really that optimized. I mean, look, it might be kind of crazy for me to say that, you know, who the heck, I'm just a nobody trying to like say something about decks that professional players are putting together. But no, seriously, I think that there were some pitfalls in some of those lists that I was seeing that people were not fully considering or people were kind of glossing over. As I've said numerous times in my previous videos, anytime you see a list for a deck online, whether it's in a YouTube video, at a Pro Tour, on Moxfield, whatever, I highly encourage you to take it with a grain of salt and really think about it, really criticize it. You know, am I just going to take this person fully at their word, or am I going to kind of tinker this in some way and experiment a little bit on my own? But I was really motivated to showcase this build for Jeskai Control because it is different. It is a little bit against the grain. So it gives you some more ideas for your own brews and your own gameplay, your own events, anything that you want to kind of take this archetype, you know, anything that you want to put it towards. If you enjoyed, then drop me a like to beat the YouTube algorithm and leave me some feedback in the comments. What do you think about Jeskai Control? What do you think about Resonating Lute? You know, am I insane for not running this card in my main deck? Do you think this archetype is capable of making a real impact in the current standard landscape? Also, if you too have been experimenting with cards from Secrets of Strixhaven and you would like some feedback on your brews or on your potential builds, or you would like to find some like-minded people to play Magic the Gathering with, then you can join my Discord server that's linked in the description. And lastly, if you are a fan of this kind of Magic the Gathering content that gets deep into deck building, play patterns, and other aspects of the game, then subscribe to the channel to see more. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video, hopefully more quickly than 2 months from now.